Thank you for making time to join us in person and online. This hybrid event has over 150 city leaders from across the state registered, and we're hoping that the hybrid event will come off as planned here. I'm thrilled for the speakers that we will be presenting to you shortly. I'm Cameron Dill, the Executive Director of the League of Cities and Towns, and it's our honor to represent you at the Capitol, but also to provide trainings and partnerships like this one to help you maximize the public assets in your community and plan to the best possible outcomes in your community. It's really, at the end of the day, this is about the social determinants of health, and it's about how do we make our communities stronger together. Before I go into the details, though, about Your Land, Your Plan, I think the most important thing is to thank our partners, because without our partners, this event would not be able to occur. And so with that, I want to introduce Kobe Daly, who's the Senior Advisor at Intermountain Healthcare, and Valerie Walton, who's the Community Development Director at Zions Bank. Intermountain Healthcare has been the primary financial sponsor, but both Zions Bank and Intermountain reached out to us a little over a year ago and said, we have this pot of money, and we have this vision. Previously, we had the keynotes you'll hear from today at the conferences, and we felt like this was a tremendous and historic opportunity to bring all these pieces together. So, Kobe and Valerie, thank you to both of you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, and great to see everyone here. Really wonderful to see this kicking off today. My name's Colby Daly. I'm, as Cameron said, Senior Advisor to Intermountain Healthcare. And, Cameron, you used the word vision, which I really appreciate, because I think what I get to stand up here and talk about is really the vision for this program in terms of supporting your land, your plan for your land. And that's what's really exciting to us. And the lens that we put on the work is social determinants of health. So I'm just curious, how many of you are familiar with that phrase, social determinants of health? Okay, a lot of folks, and not everybody. Well, it's when Intermountain's in the room, how many of you think of things like affordable housing? We're here for affordable housing, good transit, good jobs, good education, quality housing for everyone. How many say, yep, that's Intermountain Healthcare? How many think about disease treatment, getting, making sure that you have access to good healthcare, quality service provision? That's more in line with Intermountain Healthcare, right? We're all of that. And that's what we're excited about this program to do, is to step into our role really in partnership with the League, in partnership with Zions, to support the plan that you have for your land, and also advance what we call social determinants of health. These are the root causes of good health. These are those things of good quality jobs, access to good quality housing, education, safe neighborhoods, all of those things for everyone across Utah. And our priorities are front and center. Also dental care, good.
Sorry, that was the wrong slide. Yeah.
Excited about being here to help bring this language into the work that you're doing in the communities, because we're in your communities and we care very deeply about the health of communities, including through the social determinants of health framework. And so just to say a little bit more about it, another way to talk about social determinants of health is envisioning it as a river, where health starts at the headwaters. That's where the community is. That's where you all are seated, your representation. That's where policy decisions are made, investments are made on the ground to create healthy communities. Intermountain's there with you, and Your Land, Your Plan is there with you too. And so that's where we are excited to partner with the League. And of course, we're, as the river flows down, that's where you see, we want to make sure that you have access to good food, that you have access to the interventions you need and your communities need to lead those healthy lives. And of course, health treatment, providing healthcare is also at the foundation downstream, treating the conditions that are really flowing from the quality of the headwaters that you see at the top. We want to make sure that whole river is healthy, and the social determinants are there at the top. That's what Your Land, Your Plan is really focused on. That's what the League is talking about, and what you'll hear more from Strong Towns and Urban 3 about in just a minute. So we're thrilled to be here, and really just happy that you're here, and look forward to learning from you about what matters in your community, and also how we can be a good partner in the communities with you. So thanks very much. And I will turn it over to Valerie. One other point, if you have questions about anything, please, the League is here to answer those. Urban 3 is here to answer those. Strong Town. So I'm really happy to have those partners in-house.
Thanks, Colby. Hi there, I'm Valerie Walton, and I'm a Director of Development at Zions Bank. Glad to be here with you today. The first thing I want to do is just start by recognizing our partners at the League. Raise your hand if you're from the League. I just want to say that I recognize and appreciate how much effort and time and expertise goes into launching a program like this. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Zions Bank. Now, I know that a lot of you here also attended the League's annual convention, and you had an opportunity to listen to Scott Anderson give some remarks on why your land, your plan matters to Zions Bank. And today I'll be echoing some of Scott's remarks for all of you to hear. So in one core sentence, your land, your plan matters to Zions Bank because local needs, local priorities, and local solutions matter to us. Your needs, your priorities, and your solutions matter to us. The basic concept behind this program is rooted in a couple of connected observations. One, that as cities all across Utah, you own millions of dollars in real estate assets, and those assets can help you finance and support your future. Also, at the same time, we know that understanding and managing real estate is extremely complex and sometimes can even feel a little overwhelming or daunting. So your land, your plan is here to help you. It's for cities who want to know more about what real estate they own and how to manage it. We think there's a lot of opportunity in learning more about how to do that. The intent of your land, your plan isn't to help you identify surplus land so that you can immediately sell it for a one-time gain or give it away. The intent is to help you unlock the value of the land and then put some of that value to use, generating new revenue sources and new land uses that can support needed services and infrastructure, while also reducing local taxpayer burden. The real estate that you own can be a solution to many of the challenges that you face and a key tool for realizing the many opportunities that you have. I want to emphasize for all of you that your land, your plan is for cities and towns across Utah. It's tailor-made for you. Doesn't matter what part of the state you're in or how big of a population your city has. Your land, your plan is for you. Whether you identify as rural, suburban, urban, a resort, or any other kind of way, it's going to work with you to help you better understand both the obstacles as well as the opportunities that you have in relation to your real estate.
Which I'm trying to see if I can change any
today
settings.
And going forward,
Analysts can chat with
a
everyone.
lot of options and ideas about things that you could do with your
Attendees
land,
can chat with
outcomes that you might pursue,
analysts.
and how and who you might partner with. I know that not every option you hear is going to be the right fit for you. And some of what you hear might even be the opposite of what you would do with your land. And that's okay. We support you having the knowledge and information about the full range of options. We think that's helpful so that you can make an informed decision that's right for you. For Zions Bank, investing in the future of Utah's cities and towns doesn't just mean spending more money, although money is important. In addition to the tangible resources and the technical assistance that we're devoting to your land, your plan, we want you to know that we're listening. Through this program, we're going to learn a lot about what you need and want and how we can help you further. Your needs, your priorities, and your solutions matter to us. Smart public asset management is absolutely critical for your city's economy and for the future of every town and every neighborhood in Utah. Every member of your city or town deserves the chance to prosper, and to help them do that, you need to know what you own. We look forward to supporting you in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobe, and thank you, Valerie, for your partnership. And I mentioned that we've had the keynote speakers come to lead conferences before, but I want to go back to a conversation actually that Joe Minicozy had with the lead board. Feels like a decade ago now, but it was the fall before the pandemic. Joe had come to present as one of our keynote speakers, and he had a follow-up conversation with the lead board, and there are multiple board members. The lead board consists of mayors and council members from across the state, and there are multiple lead board members who asked him, where do we go from here? This is really interesting. We'd like to do something like this sort of analysis in our communities. Well, where do we go from here? And so we asked that question as a group, then the pandemic hit, and then over the last year, because the partnership with Zions and with Intermountain, we've been able to start to try to answer that question. Today is the kickoff to that event. Recognizing, though, that you're still not going to walk out of here with every answer and every tactic that you're going to need in your community, because today is the first general session, and then we're going to have follow-up workshops around the state. You can see what's currently scheduled from Price to St. George and Myrtle to Brigham, Richfield to Provo over the course of the spring through Strong Towns and through Urban 3. Because of the sponsorship of our partners, all of these workshops are free. The other thing, although I made a crack about the upcoming legislative session a moment ago, but there will be legislation during the 2023 session to facilitate and require the collection of public asset information for all public entities in the state. So this is our effort to try to get in front of that legislation, because we've been building this program over the last few months. But we will see a partnership with school districts, counties, the state of Utah, and other public entities, as everyone is looking to better understand what you own and then be able to formulate a plan of what to do with those assets. With that being said, we have one of our keynote speakers here in person, I'll introduce momentarily, and then the other keynote speaker is online. As you saw at the beginning of the meeting, we've been working through the technology in order to facilitate the hybrid meeting. And so I believe we're going to start with Joe, even though the agenda was initially going to start with Chuck. We'll start with Joe in person, and then we will hopefully be able to make Chuck work after Joe is finished. So with that, I'll introduce Joe to you. Hopefully you remember him from the lead conference a few years ago. In fact, how many of you were at that lead conference 4 years ago when Joe was there? Okay, not as many as I thought. Perfect. Well, in that case, I'm even more excited to introduce Joe. That is actually one of the fun things about working the league for me, is that with the turnover we have of elected officials, every 2 to 4 years is a new adventure. And thank you for those of you who are elected officials in this room, and for your service, and thank you to the staff who's here as well. So Joe Minicozy is with Urban 3, and Urban 3 has actually had a long-standing relationship with local governments in the state of Utah. We were introduced to Joe through Weber County and Ogden City because of work that they were doing previously with Urban 3. He's a principal there, and prior to his creation of Urban 3, he was the executive director of the Asheville, North Carolina Downtown Association. So he's an urban planner by profession, but he's an outside-the-box thinker. He was imagine new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. In fact, you blew my mind when you did the presentation for us when you were walking through Asheville and other communities around the country. And I'm hoping that we walk out of here thinking about land use a little bit differently when it's done. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard. And in 2017, he was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. I'm going to hold off to introduce Chuck until after we do Joe. So with that, Joe Minicozy, take it away.
Thank you, Cameron. Can y'all hear me all right? Sweet. All right. So I'm going to go through a lot of information pretty quickly. I'm a visual presenter. I present with pictures a lot, for any of you that have seen me present. So I will move fast. This is all being recorded, it looks like up there. So here goes. This is a 45-minute presentation where there'll be a lot of time for Q&A afterward. My background is working as a planner. Actually took a little detour. I worked in government for a little while, but then I worked for this company, Public Interest Projects, based in Asheville, North Carolina. My colleague Kate and I are both, we still live in their office, if you will. We're tenants, but it's a for-profit real estate developer that was doing public good in their project. So it's how do you make a profit, but also still meet the public's interest? Julian essentially gave $15 million of investment of his personal wealth into this company that was a revolving fund. It had to make money to keep going. And my boss is this man, Pat Whalen. And Pat's an interesting guy. What was interesting was, as a designer and as a planner, I was looking at our real estate for new ideas, but we're also looking at meeting the gaps in what the city needed in their downtown. So housing, but what do these people do when they're downtown? The key thing about what Pat was doing was minding the store, where 75% of our money went into the buildings and the real estate, and 25% was seeding entrepreneurs. So we'd find somebody with a great idea for a restaurant or a nightclub to have entertainment downtown, and we'd invest in them to start their business and then revolve that money back to the next entrepreneur once they paid off. So it's essentially a bank investment, as Valerie would say. Our time was the direct opposite. We'd spend more time with the entrepreneurs than the buildings. Once you get the building going, they kind of go along their way. But what we'd also do is talk and communicate with our citizens in our city about what is a city anyway. And a city is essentially a big real estate development project that's a finite boundary of land. So if we have about 10 acres of land in our downtown that we own, the city has how many acres of itself to manage? You have to plumb those streets and run roads out to properties to make that property work. Are you getting your cash flow out of it? And if you look up the word incorporate in the Oxford American Dictionary, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization is a legal corporation. So by law, your cities are incorporated. Actually, in Utah, y'all get it. You actually have corporation in your titles. It's a harder sell in, let's say, North Carolina, where we live, where they think that government is different. Our cities are incorporated, our counties are incorporated, our states are incorporated, and so is our country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert show when he was still vice president. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. I'm such a nerd that I looked it up. On the bottom of the slide is the title and code that lists us as a federal corporation for any attorneys in the room that want to look it up. So my city, when I talk to my public officials, my city is 7 times the potency of Ted Turner. How's Ted Turner making his decisions? He's going to be looking at data and trying to figure out the information before he does his investments in different television programs and stuff like that. So we're more powerful. Little old Asheville, North Carolina is more potent than Ted Turner. And if you look at the buildings inside that land, again, remember, the land is finite in a lot of communities, particularly the communities that are within the Salt Lake Metro. You have other cities and towns kind of right up against your border. So that land is what you have. And think of when you talk to farmers and they talk of crops, they're going to talk about water per acre, labor per acre, crop yield per acre. So this is one of our crops. This is a building that we rehabbed. The city did a streetscape project. So thank you, city, for your municipal investment for that streetscape, the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches and a street tree. That's awesome. We went ahead and put in ground floor retail, second floor office, and upper stories residential in the top 4 floors. We took the taxable value from $300,000 to $11 million. So when I talk to folks in my community, I say to them, do you realize our effort produced 3,500% more taxes on that same entity? So do you all have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? Wouldn't you like that? You know, this is how we cultivate wealth in our community, is by rehabbing these structures that are just sitting there fallow. So again, pushback. People would have biases. They're like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. It's Walmart's $20 million. Fair enough. That Walmart is double the value of our building. But it took 34 acres of my farm to make that happen versus the 0.2 acres of our building. When you use gross numbers of gross value, you're essentially missing the component that's most critical, which is your land. So per acre, we're producing 100 times more property taxes, double the retail taxes. Who would have thought that a furniture store, a beauty salon, a tattoo shop, and an office is double the tax productivity of a Walmart? But it is. Obviously more residents and more jobs. So this isn't to basically shame the building type. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Understand the game of how the taxation works in your community. Incidentally, I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers Conference. I don't know if y'all are any tax assessors in the room. Anybody hang out with a bunch of tax assessors? Anybody want to imagine what it's like to be with 3,000 of them in one room? It was incredibly square. But this guy, they're awesome people. They're mathletes. But this guy got up and did this amazing presentation on how cheap Walmarts are. Let that wash over you for a second. You've got 3,000 assessors in one room, and you're proving you have minimal value. So that means your tax bill goes down, right? This is incredibly brilliant. I'm thinking, this is awesome. How efficient. One meeting, 3,000 tax bills go down, right? Now, as the former elected government employee, I was like, why does nobody care about this? I mean, I'd be furious. But assessors are agnostic. If it's low value, it's low value, period. So I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, I went up to the microphone. I said, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he honestly shot back 15, 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate as fast as possible. We'll build another building, depreciate it down again. Is that the deal that you want in your corporation, that somebody's minimizing their investment to minimize their tax burden? Meanwhile, you're picking up that bill. The average Walmart consumes more in police services than it pays in property taxes, period. And this isn't to, again, don't hate the player, hate the game, understand the game, and make sure that it's a conscious commitment from your corporation that investment is 15 years, which is the life cycle of a cat. If you're okay with that, awesome. I'm a dog person, by the way. No offense to the to the cat people. I'm making a joke of this to make light of the fact that we're not asking the right questions about our own government. And this is all part of how do you respond and get involved in this. This isn't complex math that I'm doing here. This is fifth grade division. So when we talk about cars, could you imagine if I said my truck gets 650 miles per tank, it's the best vehicle for driving right here? Of course, you'd laugh. You're just like, Joe, look, we all say miles per gallon, not miles per tank, right? All tanks are different sizes. So rather than miles per tank, we asked the question miles per gallon, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Asettas. It's 70 miles per gallon. Sorry to the Prius owners, but 1955 technology is more efficient, right? That's how we gauge efficiency. It's also a dangerous little car. If you have a head on that thing, you're stuck in it. That's the front door right there. Anyway, it's again a joke, but I'm pointing out we have the language and the terminology of efficiency. Just use it. So we've done this all across the country. I think we've done 40 states now. Canada, Australia, New Zealand. When you look at the productivity of buildings, this is what we see across the. Let me see if I can turn this thing. I don't know how to get the banner off up there. For every dollar of county taxes, somebody in the unincorporated county, single family, is paying to the county. Their brother and sister is paying about 5 times that to the same county. This is the Walmart, the mall, a 2-story building, a 3-story building, and a 6-story building. Now, these are all buildings under the high-rise threshold. So we're not talking about big buildings. But if you're in a small town, just look at the first green bar here. This could be Driggs, Idaho, Draper, Utah, downtown Dallas, or downtown Durham. As soon as you start stacking your stories, you're stacking your wealth, period. If you're efficient on your land, you're more tax potent in your development. It's that simple. And again, understanding that the modern American system of real estate has figured out the opposite. The more land that I blow through, the cheaper the building, the lower my tax production. Again, don't hate the player, hate the game. So if we can do this and understand this from an economic standpoint, how do we talk about it? And what we like to talk about in our company is that there's visualizations that we understand. I can show you your brain with your creative thought process in green versus your brainstem activity in blue. I can show you a picture inside your head. Can I do an economic productivity model of your community? So we're known for these maps of economic analysis this way, but here's what we basically do. This is my county in total tax value. We have a couple of really big federal parks in our county. So this is Mount Mitchell, which is the highest mountain east of the Mississippi. Nothing like your mountains. We get it. This is the second tallest mountain, but at least east of the Mississippi, we're cool. We've got the 2 biggest mountains east of the Mississippi. It's gray. It's non-taxable. We don't care about it. It's not paying us taxes. Just look at that coldly. In green, we have low value. And in purple, we have high value. This big purple splotch right there is the Biltmore Estate. That's America's largest house. That one house is worth $100 million. Isn't that awesome? But it's really not fair to talk about it that way because that one house is a 180,000 square foot house. Anybody have a 180,000 square foot house in this room? Of course not. It's like the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, let's look at this on a value per acre basis. Same information, different question. Here it is. And let's not stop here. Let me show it to you in 3D. So when I talk to folks in my community, we're talking at this level about tax production. We all pay 6 mils in taxes in our county. And when I got folks out in Fairview County, I mean, literally they got the state legislature to call our downtown a cesspool of sin, which is really awesome. Kate and I are involved with our downtown association, and we produced this map because it's not fair to the folks out in Fairview to not show them what we do in downtown. Does anybody want to guess where downtown Asheville is on this map? It's that big purple thing. It's a big purple mountain shooting off the map, right? That's the potency of our downtown for a city of 90,000 people. Just east of us out here in Black Mountain, that's about 10 miles away. That's a little village of 13,000 people. You can see its little downtown popping up right there too. So let's visualize this information and have a common communication, a common discourse about how we're all in this corporation together and how to produce the best wealth for our community, but understand what's going on. So this is to think about this from a portfolio analysis. This is a $35 billion portfolio of real estate is one picture, and we can see the production. So our attitude is to show you all information. Don't just talk about it. That's our challenge. We ask you to challenge us on this in this process. We'll try to do what we can to bring you examples. And I'll show you a bunch of examples that we have from around the country, but we'll start with here. So this is your county in total value. No, the lapel's not on. You want me to put it on? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's try this. Am I getting feedback now? Okay. So this is the total value. So you have a lot of like the airport actually has a value under it, but it's not taxable. So this is the value per acre, and you can see the heat sliding to downtown Salt Lake up here, Salt Lake City. And here's the, I'm going to step a little bit further away from that thing. This is Salt Lake County in 3D, the production of it. And again, you can see the value sliding down the spine of the highway right here. And you all know that, you know, when you get up into the mountains, there's a gap. This is Salt Lake City, total value per acre. Again, total value per acre, and 3D. And then this is, we have also done Ogden. This is Ogden, total value per acre, 3D. You can see downtown Ogden popping up right here. Actually, we'll come into detail on downtown Ogden is this spike here, but Ogden's done a great job sliding their value northward. They're basically replicating downtown northward into higher density development. Speaking of value and exemption, Ogden is about 40% non-taxable. There's not a perfect number here of what you should have as non-taxable land. Think of your schools, your city, your town hall, your city hall, temples, churches. That's going to parks. Those are going to be non-taxable, but that's also your asset that you control, right? And then also we're going to talk about a smaller place, Magna, which is an old mining town that's sort of been gobbled up by Salt Lake City on the western edge. Just little Magna is worth close to $2 billion of value, if you want to think about it from a portfolio. So again, into the corporation analogy, if I can show you the revenue, is this all too nerdy first thing out the door? Are we doing all right? I tend to go a little fast on this stuff, but this is Eugene, Oregon asked us to look at not only the revenue, but also, are we still getting feedback? Okay, cool. But look at the cost. So this is floating the whole city in a lake and looking at the revenue coming out of the ground and then the costs going underwater. So if I know that folks are paying this much in taxes and I can run a bill for what it costs the government to send them a pipe, a road, an electric wire, we should be thinking of that transaction. And I'm not saying everybody pay their own way. You're going to make subsidy and choices in your community, just make them transparent. So if I net my cost against my revenue, this is the ROI, where net positive is in black and net negative is in red. And then here's the model from the top view. You can see what's net positive, and you can see where downtowns are typically extremely productive. They're very expensive to service them, but you're also getting a lot of tax yield out of them. And if you lift this model like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, you can see the subsidy across the model. So just do this as a transparent cash flow analysis and be agnostic about it. What's going on? How is this the best choice for us? Does this match up with policy? So for them, we broke their city down into, I call this the Brady Bunch slide. You've got your residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low density, medium density, high density, commercial, low, medium, and high. And these are the sticker prices. So for their community, single family detached housing is subsidized to the tune of about $1,300, $1,400 an acre. And it is what it is. Again, not to make judgment about it, but to be seeing this as a cash flow and make sure that you can afford this. So if you're going to continue to have 80% of their land uses in that subsidy, you might want to do a little bit more of the stuff that's going to produce wealth so that you can afford to float it, but also be honest with your citizens so they can be aware of it. So where are your problems? What are the things that you have to pay for? How do you pay for them? What are the policies that you set up? Ogden has actually done a great job with affordable housing and taking the reins on this. So obviously they know where their purple is. They know how to make more purple, and they're addressing it with some of their gray stuff, the non-taxable. This is a shot in their downtown, is down here at 25th at the old station. That's their original Main Street, but you see this kind of big gray bar that goes northward right here. Those are all redevelopment projects. They're essentially publicly held projects through different in EDA and RDA and a URA. So these are redevelopment areas where they've taken the reins of making these developments happen along the way. They've done actually a lot of them. There's more than just the downtown. They've have a lot of different areas. So our challenge to Ogden at that time was like, make sure that you have a benchmark of where that is, and are you gaining wealth? Is it worth your investment? These are a couple of projects that are in those redevelopment areas. To give you a comparison, on the lower left of the slide right here is the Walmart. Their Walmart's about, let's call it $600,000 an acre of value production. This building right here is 2.2 million. This building is crazy valuable at about let's call it 9.8 million. But even check out these little townhouses right here, which actually Kate and I were driving in. There's literally some like right across the street over here that are very similar to this, pulling 8.3 million an acre. Who would think that little townhouses are almost as productive as this thing right there? So don't let your eyes deceive you that it has to be a big building to give you wealth, that you can actually have smaller production through little buildings. But this is a development that I think is pretty interesting as well. As this is over on Main Street. This is an older infill project that they did. And in 2017, it was pulling about 10.6 million an acre. And this is an affordable housing project. So who would have thought that an affordable housing project is actually that much more potent? And again, it comes down to a factor of the density, the location, and what people are doing with the building. Also, the retail is helping on the ground floor. So that was a good, a great project to analyze. I would recommend that Greg is a person to talk with. He's just retired. This is a picture of him from his retirement party. But Greg is produced an incredible amount of that work. This just came out, I think, on December 15th, so last month. They're continuing to use our work in development going forward. So we started with this project in 2017. So here we are close to 6 years later, and they're still working with us. So that's a medium-sized town, a little bit on the bigger side. Let's go to a smaller place in Magna. So it's out at the edge on the way out to the mines. They have a little Main Street right there, and this is its current production. And we've got one little spike right there. About 15 acres of land in their downtown. Their downtown footprint, and compared to their whole footprint, compared to the punch in the pocketbook from a property tax standpoint, is about a 2-to-1 ratio. So think about this. You should think of your ratios of how do you develop what's good production. Generally 1 to 6 or 6 times ratio production is good for a downtown. So they're way underperforming given the scale of their city. This is, if they just restored some of the buildings that are just sitting there fallow, they could actually get it to 6 times. And also doing a couple infill projects. And I'll show you where those are. So their Main Street is averaging about 1.4 million of production. These 3 parcels here are a development opportunity. Those are publicly held land that fell into the hands of Salt Lake County and Magna. But here they are. And, just vacant lots. Now, if you just, the value right now is about 2.5 or to 250,000, so $250,000 per acre. Going back in time and looking at the history of the town, there's Magna, little Magna when it back in its early settlement. It's got this little grid right there. And then here it is. This is what the main street used to look like. So what we find with a lot of communities, if you actually go back to your great grandparents, you find that they were doing this stuff because they had minimal amounts of opportunity to do infrastructure. So they're packing people in on their main street in particular and getting that density. It's also, we were walking back then, even though there are a couple cars in here. But we pulled their Sanborn maps, and those are the 3 properties. There actually used to be 3 buildings there. So just as a really simple test, we just, like Frankenstein, we just rebirthed these buildings, a billiard and tobacco bar thing, a coffee shop, and a billiard store. So I guess it's like a billboard sandwich with some coffee in between. But there are other examples of old buildings that are still left, so we could use that as a comparable. Just as a really simple exercise, just rubber stamp that number over. What would you produce? But before we get there, let's talk about Magna's pattern. One of the things that we see with a lot of communities, this is 1869 and 1950, so over 100 years is the brown stuff. But when you look at from 1968 to today, basically, you see how much more of they just metastasized and grew their city out, which is a lot more infrastructure. And you can see this is a bar chart down here showing the waves of development and how much they did in 1968 to 1990, and then again over here versus what they had for 100 years right there. So here's their downtown. Here it is if they just rehab the buildings, and then here's if they just had the buildings that they didn't clear. If they just left the buildings there and just rehab them, that's a pretty good jump. Here's the potential with just a 3-story building if they bring in a new building under current market conditions. And you can see how high that pumps up. Again, remember, it doesn't have to be a skyscraper to get the potency. So here it is, like radiating. You can think of it as a radiating its value outward. That once you can start to get your main street going, you can actually get more infill and development around it. It becomes a catalyst for investment. And again, this is land that they have control over in their community. So speaking of that land, I'm just going to jump ahead because of time. With Salt Lake County, when you look at the county, it was kind of stunning, but you all know this, you protect your mountains here. We don't do a great job in the East Coast doing this, but 50% of your county is non-taxable. In the valley, you're doing most of your construction. To show you by comparison, this is Salt Lake City, about 53% non-taxable. Again, there isn't a magic number, but if you think about the state buildings, the county buildings, the city buildings, there's a lot of land that gets eaten up in Salt Lake City. And this is just in downtown Salt Lake is about 30%. This is actually lower than downtown Asheville. Downtown Asheville is about 44% non-taxable. So thinking of these assets, you don't just go and just convert them all or use all of them. There are going to be properties that are going to be sacred. The sides of the mountains, the wetlands, the city hall or something like that. So we just filtered off some stuff that would be easy, low-hanging fruit in Salt Lake County. And that's the blue stuff, the minimum viable product. But even when you add all that stuff up, it equals 44 square miles of opportunity. To show you the scale of that, this is what 44 square miles looks like compared to the whole county. It's about the size of South Jordan in land area. So think of all of South Jordan as an opportunity in the county. Now, there of course have buildings on them, so we went ahead and showed that. This is the amount of buildings that are currently on all of those lands. So this isn't to go and take down the school or to knock down City Hall, but there might be a parking lot that you could use. There might be an area that you could use and still keep those buildings. So here's those properties in downtown. This is the city. The county owns about 9.4 square miles. That would be about a $3 billion opportunity. So this is just the county's aspect of that. If you were to put those blue parcels into play, you're going to yield about $2 million an acre of revenue. And again, this isn't to sell them, but to see we can make cash flow on those. And you could solve things like affordable housing, teachers housing, stuff like that. So here's an example. This is actually in Salt Lake, in downtown, or Salt Lake City. This is the downtown. This is a parking lot and a building that the community's just acquired, which is this building right here. It's the old public safety building. Ironically, it was a public building, went into private hands, and it's back to the public. But there's also this big parking lot that's with it. So it's about an 8-floor building. Here it is, with a penthouse on it. It used to be, in 1958, it was a private office building with a penthouse, and it's pulling about a $48 million of value per acre as an opportunity, basically. So this is, if it converts into a taxable building on public land, you're going to still get $48 million of value per acre. Here's how it rolls out. From there, in 1979, it converted into a public safety building with police and fire in it, no value. So it went from value down to nothing. And then here's an opportunity. If you're to have, if you're going to continue it as public, it would have upkeep, maintenance, no taxes. And the future is you could have a development in it and get some cash out of it for public benefit. So you can cooperate with the developer and get rent on the property, basically. So that could address public benefit. You could use that cash flow to go straight to providing an art program, providing for parks, or you could do this for attainable housing, which is what they're basically considering as workforce housing, which you'll have to subsidize that rent, basically. So you're going to get maximum yield. You're going to get a mix of revenue from benefit from attainable housing. The top floors are going to be direct market. So that could be just for market rents up there, subsidized rents here. And then down here, they're talking about childcare, a break room for the transit authority, community resources. So the public will have access to the ground floor, and with it, you're still getting rents. Does that all make sense? It's a hybrid solution. It's a public-private cooperation. So you could actually pull out about 1.5 million of revenue per year, which could stream into a market. Let's say if we're to afford to buy somebody like Pat for the public, you could use that cash flow to get your most optimistic real estate developer ever. Get like the Ted Lasso of development. This person that's going to be looking for the public's good, solving public's problems, but being diligent about getting the project done. So again, back to the yield. There are places that are sacred. There are pieces that should immediately be lifted off the table. When you look at all of your assets, that's going to be your first question. What is off the table? And that gets reduced from the system. Then there are going to be policy objectives. Obviously, you need a fire station, affordable housing, things like that. Those are just pure, we need to solve the problem for the public needs. Here's another example in Salt Lake. This is the Fleet Block. It's about 1,000 feet away from a transit stop. And yet this is, the city was using it for its public fleet to park trucks and stuff like that. Not the highest and best use for that property. And you can see that there are developers already showing you development right there. So just at a really simple level, what if we just did more of that, 10 million an acre into this property? That would yield an $82 million development right there that you could still hold as a public asset and draw that as a rent. Now that's one level of thinking. You can do a bunch of different things. You could also build on that, but as far as a use, it's definitely not the highest and best use to have that property be used for trucks, basically. So it comes down to three ways of looking at this. That you have, let's take a library, for instance, and a greenway, and then you've got a side parcel. The library is your policy. We need to have a library, period. How do you make that happen? The greenway is more of a heritage piece. It's something that's, once it's in, it's there forever. Definitely for things like your watersheds, you need to have your water. But there might be parcels that could be yield producing that are still within the control of that asset. Is this a simple way simple enough to think about this? Does this work for y'all? So think of it as finding those pieces. You actually have these examples within your community. That your library is a perfect example of this. You have a public library there, which is a policy. You have legacy effects. You have open spaces that you need open space in a downtown. But then you look at something like the bookstore. the bookstore is a yield in that property. It can produce revenue in your property, a very small amount, but it's still producing that. So from a scale of difficulty and yield potential, obviously a vacant lot is going to produce a high yield. It's an easy opportunity. Something like finding land around City Hall might be a little bit more difficult. So, and then there's things like middle of the way, which is finding a way to do affordable housing in a project. Again, another example is the old fire station. Very simple effort. There was the building, they basically just sold it. But you lost all opportunities once you sold that fire station to become a restaurant. You could have worked a little harder, or the city could have, to maintain that property, but still get rents on it and get a higher yield potential just by increasing the effort a little bit and to go increase the yield. So think of this as you can have a yield that's just you cash out, but then there's a longer term process to getting revenue. Let me kind of jump ahead here. So this is another example that we worked with the county on. There was this baseball stadium, Smith Ballpark. You have private land, but you have the UTA has some land immediately adjacent. The county owns some land nearby as well. But also look at this little surface parking lot right there at the baseball stadium. At the time we were doing this project, we were also doing, by the way, the baseball stadiums can be used for other things. In Oklahoma City, they actually do slides down the baseball stadium in the wintertime, which is interesting. But they get rent out of that. But another example is in North Augusta, and actually on the other side of the state line in South Carolina. You can see that little spike that's popping up right there. That's this clubhouse condo mixed use building that's out in the outfield. So they basically built a building on the outfield wall that's pulling about 57 million per acre of tax revenue. So as they built the stadium, they basically got some tax yield out of that. And that's the spike that's popping up right there. So what if we were to think of it this way, that you have a baseball stadium, and so our analyst, Josh McCarty, just took this apartment building right there and dropped it into the parking lot. And you can see that it fits about 2 times over. So just by replicating what's across the street, you can pull about $30 million of value, or about 9.4 million an acre in production. Is that an easy project to do? No. But is it worth it for you to do? And that's the question for the community. It's your land. You can do it if you want. So this is the other county lot down the way, and what could happen there with development. So there are also publicly held golf courses that we were asked to look at. If you look at the golf courses in the community, it takes up 2 square miles of that public land. That's a lot of opportunity in a single use. And, you know, we basically were like, what kind of golf course do you want to have? A regular golf course? This is a miniature golf course that's on public land as well. But that one has a volcano. But your mini golf, you can fit, is about 8.5 acres. Two of those equal the market value of 113 acres of regular golf. So let that wash over you for a second. These things are really potent. Not to say everybody needs to be a mini golfer, but it's an opportunity. And plus you can get bumper boats. But the Mulligan's golf course was one that we looked at. And we just did this as a mixed use development. That again, this is a community question. Do you want to sacrifice that land? Here's your opportunity. You can get an office. We went ahead and put a mini golf in there, so you still didn't lose any golf. Another office over here, multifamily townhouses and single family. So just a larger development. Here it is popping in. And then basically it goes from a market value of 8.8 million to 149 million as the Mulligan's development project. Again, an opportunity. Now first, I know that we're going through a lot of big city examples. We found a very, very small town example just as an idea. In Folkston, Georgia, which is in the middle of nowhere at the southeastern tip of basically Florida in the Okefenokee Swamp, they actually started marketing trains. This is a website called railfanning.org. Did you all know that this exists? There's like people that like looking at trains. And they basically, this is a town that was settled on a train, and they basically owned that. They said, we're going to lean into this train as an opportunity and allow people to come visit and watch. they got a state grant to use their land to build this, basically a little place where you could watch the train go by and have a picnic. This is it. Not a lot of investment. It's a landmark. And over the town is what, 4,000 people? Now they had 20,000 people annually visit to sit there and watch a train go by. For a town of 4,000 people, think of this, 4,000 people, you're importing 20,000 people to buy 20,000 hot dogs. So do something, but they're actually seeing who you are and seeing that opportunity. Obviously, the next step is how many of those people did you convert to new residents or convert to new businesses? But this is how they used an asset, not to sell it, but to use it as and leverage it for their own community's wealth. But they used a grant from the state as opposed to finding other ways to do this. Other examples, just to kind of step out a little bit and stretch our brains. This is Amsterdam had this old hospital, and they basically didn't tear it down. They didn't sell it. They rented it to a hotel, and the hotel pays them revenue as cash flow. So it went from a hospital that was created in 1891 and it opened as a hotel in 2013. There are examples all over the place that you can steal from. This is Copacabana Beach. Right across from the beach was a high school. I mean, come on now, is that the best place for a high school? I mean, it's like, I'm sure the high school students loved it, but when you look at the density of the city, and that's a little high school down there, they basically found a way to relocate it and used and leveraged that asset in their community. This is one of my favorites. This is a little bit quirky, but this is in Copenhagen. This is an old wharf that the community owned, and they're like, this is our vision for the future. We're going to hold this land, convert it into a development, basically. And here it is growing. These are their visions for the future for it. They want to accommodate 40,000 people and get 40,000 jobs on that, basically live and work the folks there. And as an investment, they're going to yield development, which is going to yield revenue. Even though it's publicly held, they're also publicly profit sharing with the developer. So as the developer makes money, they're making money. They're a partner in it. And that comes back for future reinvestment. The state owns about 5% of it. The city owns 95% of it. And that ownership will not change. The developers team that they work with is essentially a partner builder on the property. And just to give you, again, a big stretching example, in America, we have this. We own, actually the citizens of Green Bay own the Green Bay Packers. Did y'all know that's the only NFL football team that is privately owned, and each ticket holder is a shareholder. And when they needed to expand the Lambeau Field, they had to go to the board of directors to do this. The board of directors decided we need to do the stadium and we also need to raise shares. So they sold more tickets basically because they were going to expand the stadium. It was easy business, but they also have to make decisions for this guy. They have to pay this person his money, right? So this isn't going to go back to the public for making that decision on what Aaron Rodgers should be paid. That is done by the folks that run the corporation. But they expanded the stadium on that, and they also got a Super Bowl out of it. So this is what they were doing from a public investment standpoint. From the shareholder standpoint, they want to have that team in their community. So here's their buyback options. If you want to look it up, this is how they did it. It's a pretty simple way of thinking about what you could do with your property. So again, thinking for the public's good in this. Finally, one last example, and this is probably a very exciting example, but the Mayo Clinic is based in Rochester, Minnesota, which is down here in the middle of nowhere. And Mayo opened up an office an operation in Scottsdale. And when they did that, the state stepped in and said, we want to leverage our opportunity to keep Mayo in Rochester, in New York, Minnesota, because it means something for our state. So they hired Patrick to be the Ted Lasso. His job is to mind the store and make sure that there are other complementary goods in the downtown to keep the Mayo Clinic there. So the investment that comes from the state and the municipality flows through Patrick. And Patrick's job is to make sure that things happen, that there's apartments for lab techs, affordable housing for nurses, places for doctors, also places for them to eat, hotels for visitors that when their family is there to getting cancer treatment. But they are also doing like an annual report. So we ran the numbers for them. This is what they had, producing about $7 million in taxes in 2015. And they've grown that wealth to $9.4 million of new taxes, still maintaining that land in the public's trust. So that's a 60% increase in taxes in their downtown over that 5-year window. That's a really potent return on investment. And it also keeps the Mayo Clinic there. So it just, again, I'm throwing a lot of examples at you. None of these are going to be the perfect fit for everybody, but some we should be able to cobble them together to see how these public assets work for you. So just to close, for putting the public assets to use, just to stretch your brains out a little bit. We were looking at Utah and your places. This is your cities based on population. We know that there's a lot of, not everybody is Salt Lake City. Not everybody is within the Salt Lake City a growth area in the Wasatch Valley, but you're looking at places like Moab, and here you are from a population standpoint. If you just look at the total population, again, Moab is really small. What was surprising to me is Provo and St. George are about the same population. But when you take it and say, well, what's your density? You've got land in there. And this is just, again, here's the density model. Your land area is 3D. And then here's your density. What was surprising to me is look at little Moab is about the same density as St. George. And you look at Provo is about the density of Salt Lake City. And there are areas that are actually more dense. Orem is more dense than Salt Lake City. Did y'all know that? Don't let your biases of how you look at information limit you and what you could be going forward. So just to close, our model in this program is going to be, who are you? Are you a city? Are you going to be taking a path of a larger city? What is your downtown? Do you have a downtown? What's your cluster? Where are your accesses to opportunities, your resources? You're going to have a difficult time figuring out where to start. Usually cities can get an analysis paralysis. You have too many choices, and we're going to help work with you to create a decision tree. And then finally, think of your partners. Cities also have more access to partners. The county's usually in the city. There might be other nonprofit partners as well. And how do you negotiate those? When you get into the suburban areas, oftentimes they're usually bedroom communities that live off other areas, and then they grow into becoming cities themselves. You're going to probably, if the closer you are to the use of growing all of your development out, you're probably starting to feel the pain of utilities, road costs, things like that. For newer suburbs, you don't really see that just yet. You're exporting your residents to other places to work. That's an opportunity to cultivate that in your own community. You're going to want to start also thinking about infill a little bit more in developing place and placemaking. For small towns, there's small towns with big tourism, obviously ski slope areas, areas that you're going to have Airbnb issues or short-term rental. Affordable housing is going to be more of your priority, and how to deal with those vacation rentals. And then finally, the small town that's remote and extremely rural, you're going to feel limited in your resources, your ability to grow. There's going to be a much limited staff resources. You don't have an entire fleet of people that, let's say, Salt Lake City has, but you have to do more with less people, basically, and you know what the challenges of that. But also, you can be faster than a big community because you know everybody. But the other key thing is you're exporting your jobs and residents. You sometimes feel the loss of population. So the implementation structure going forward, we're going to be walking you through which category you're in, and then thinking through how do you map your assets? What's that going to be from a challenge? Then how do you sort them? What's going to be the legacy, the policy, the hybrid example, or the yield example? And then how are you going to fund? What's going to be the needs of the government? And what's your Ted Lasso, or I would use Pat Whalen in this? You're going to have somebody that you can identify that's going to take on this project, and that person's going to have to get things done. There's going to be some challenges to that. There's going to be some risks, but that's what entrepreneurialism is that you have to make some mistakes, but you're also going to get some successes out of that too. And then that you're going to see a yield that comes back to the city out of it. So I guess that's where we're at. I'm in my 45 minutes. Think when you go back to your community, think about those assets. Think about what other partners are out there in your community, the county, the nonprofit partners. We're going to hear from Chuck next. I'm going to recommend that you read his book on this and thinking about putting into context the cost of your public services, the cost of the roads that you carry, the cost of decisions that were made well before you stepped into your roles in leadership, and send your staff to the next workshops. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Joe. We appreciate that. We're going to pivot a little bit just because of the technical issues. So right now we're going to have Joe answer some questions online and in the audience. In the audience, just use your best strong voice. We don't have a mic, but I do have the first. And then after some Q&A, we're going to take a break, try to hook up a different computer and get Chuck to do his presentation. So my first online question from Ted at WFRC is, how do parking requirements affect economic productivity per acre?
Is Ted's last name Lasso? Parking requirements have a huge effect. How do I hide the screen thing up here? There we go. We did a project in Peoria, Illinois. Let me see if I can find it. I generally recommend to people to, for most downtowns, just get rid of your parking requirements. Sort of not necessary. People freak out when I say that, but it's a killer to your revenue growth. And I'll show you an extreme example. Peoria told us they had a parking problem. This is downtown Peoria. Every meeting I went to, they're like, well, there's no place to park. The first thing I do is draw a map of your parking. So this is the water, the greenway stuff, parks, buffers, whatever. These are their streets. Here's their parking. These are all their buildings, and these are all parking decks. And I said to them, doesn't look like you got a parking problem. Looks like you got a perception problem, right? Can you walk a block? Can you walk half a block? You got a parking lot within a half a block of everything. So here's how it works financially. This is the average Peoria resident right there. There she is. When you got buildings and parking, there's going to be an average square foot. So these are their numbers in Peoria. They have about 3 parking spaces per every resident in Peoria. And they have about 1,200 square feet of buildings per person. When they get built, this is what the assessor puts a sticker gun on stuff, right? So this is the value per square foot of a building. This is the value per square foot of parking. This is actually on the high side. We've seen it down as low as 25 cents a square foot for parking for valuation. So when you tax, let's say we're all taxing 6 mils on this. You're taxing 6% on $35, 6% on $1.50. That's your simple cash flow. Cost of roads are going to be $22 a square foot in front of the parking, or in front of the parking and in front of the building. When we did this in Indianapolis, it took 50 years for the building to pay off the road in front of it. It took 3,000 years for the parking to pay off the road in front of it. Roads only last 40 years. So if you're not doing that calculus and you're requiring me as a developer to build parking everywhere, if I do it this way, it's really cheap for me and I pay low taxes over time. So just, again, be conscious of that. Be conscious of that exchange. I'm not saying get rid of parking and everybody's got to get rid of their car. That would be silly. But we need to be conscious of the impact. Remember, we manage the car when it moves around as a public good, right? We call that roads. That's a public service. But when the car stops, all of a sudden it becomes a private solution that we foist on the private individual, or you do a parking structure. Now, the parking structure is at least efficient because you're going to take 4 layers of surface parking and make a 4-layer deck, right? So you're going to still keep that opportunity for development, but just think it through. That would be my solution to the caller on that. Does that make sense?
We have one more online question while you guys are generating some here. And this is from Jessica. When you say 48 million generated per acre with the old PUP example, what does the 48 million equal in direct revenue to the municipality?
Was that on the golf course?
Old PUP example, I'm not sure which one.
Which example is that?
PUD example, 48 million generated per acre.
Oh, yeah, so good, thank you. Sorry, that was, yeah. Sorry, I kind of spoke a little fast on that. Okay, so if we just converted this building back to what it was used before the public took it over for public safety. So it was a private building. It did have a penthouse. It had an office in it. So there it is, the Northwest Pipe Company. If we just flipped it back to office comp and just said, let's just get the public out of it, it would be $48 million an acre. So that's think of that as one benchmark. That's a tide mark of what you could set on your boat. Now, obviously, it's gone back to the police and fire, so it's 100% zero from a tax basis, but it's providing a lot of service. It's providing office space for those individuals, which you would pay for in the marketplace otherwise, or build a new building. So we used 48 million as like, that's like a tide mark. Do you want to be over or under that with your new development? It was just, think of it as a benchmark. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I walked out, so I hope you knew that. So, is that okay if I just?
Yeah. I'll repeat the question.
Never incorporate economic impact studies into your overall assessment. Like, I was just thinking, for example, like the mountains. I mean, probably if you did like a economic impact study, like a lot of what's going on with your businesses in the board have to do with recreation or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, there's, so the question is like, do we do economic impact statements, or how do you treat the public amenity, right?
Or just anything that's not representation, that is part of why you have it.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One of the early on when we started doing this analysis, I think I was in California, and somebody asked me, they're like, you just don't care about our parks and open space. Like, and this gentleman went a little far, and he's like, what about the soul of our community? And I was like, how do I measure your soul? It was kind of a little mind blowing to me, but, let's see. In Minneapolis, we saw something really super cool that I thought was a great way of thinking about it. Let's see. This is Hennepin County. This is just the land value per acre. So one of the things we did is we just turned off all of the buildings and just looked at the land value per acre. So if you all look at your tax bills, you'll see two numbers. You'll see your improvement value or your building value, then you'll see your land value. So the assessor sets value on both of those. Land value is the best way that we can judge how your methodology works for your assessment. But this is their land value per acre. And when I saw this, one of the things you're seeing is highly consistent. Minnesotans are really rigorous with their data. You're seeing highly consistent flat plateaus. But there are a couple of weird things going on. So you see this one little spike that pops up in downtown. But the thing that was kind of bizarre to me is out by the lakes. This is a big amenity out there. Out by that lake, you see this little town called Wayzata. Wayzata is 10,000 people. And you know this. You go out to a ski town. You go out to Park City. It's like a little village that's out there. It's got a little main street. But how is the dirt in Wayzata the same potency as the dirt in Minneapolis? That was mind blowing to me. Now, as I was showing this, one of the planners there was highly nerdy, and they're Minnesotans, and he goes, "Oh my God, you've just presented the ordinance of 88-647. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, back before 1988, all the lakes in the county had to be publicly accessible. We're the land of lakes. We thought it was a public good to have publicly accessible lakes. But after 1988, they passed an ordinance where you could sell lakefront real estate. So if you look at Wayzata, see how there's a crust of value around the lake? Those that are adjacent to the amenity capture the value of the amenity. So think of it this way. If God says all land is worth the same value, and the hand of God steps in and makes a lake or an ocean, that value doesn't disappear. It slides to the edge of the lake, right? We all are conscious of lakefront real estate or mountain town ski slope adjacent real estate. So how do you spread that into your community? If you just let one property get that value, that one property clearly gets it. But note over here in this neighborhood that's built in the 1920s, these two lakes are publicly accessible. There's a public greenway that goes around both lakes. There's a public park in the middle of it. That value didn't disappear. It just slid into the neighborhoods adjacent to it. And you see how the whole neighborhood, because the whole neighborhood has access to that amenity, has access to that value. So again, this is just we weren't expecting that when we did this model. I didn't even know about this 1988 ordinance. We weren't hired to look at it. It was just that happened because of the graphic. We could now show it. So it's just, I would just be conscious of that. That's part of your public weighing of options. What if that is our amenity in our community, that is going to provide value to us. We're going to usually see that in the cost of housing, and who can afford to live there. At an extreme example, and maybe after this we can talk if you're a ski town. We just did Sun Valley, Idaho, and they have a tremendous problem in limited resources there, and they're having ridiculous housing problems. That it's otherworldly. I can go into it if we don't have other questions, but yeah.
Okay, another one online from Dennis. For small towns considering slight densification of downtowns, what are good strategies for the long game so you don't lose potential with vacant, scrapped land redevelopment?
Could you rephrase that question again? It's like small towns with potential. What are
Considering slight densification of their downtowns, what are some good strategies for the long game so you don't lose potential with any vacant or raised lands redeveloping? Like how do you keep those without them being, I guess, developed? How do you develop a long-term strategy for that with municipal assets instead of having them just not sit vacant, but also not get taken up by an initial developer? Does that make sense? Like, how do you have a long-term plan? I think Dennis, I'm probably butchering the question, Dennis, but that's how I read it.
I think part of this is maintaining the value. If you want to maintain that small town value, it's going to depend. I mean, it's towns evolve. Our city, we're 90,000 people right now. Our city used to be the second largest city in North Carolina. And then we just froze in 1930. We were the highest debt per capita of the entire United States. When our books were audited, we thought we had $7 million in the bank. It turned out we had $17,000 in the bank. We had clerical error. Our entire city council was indicted and the mayor committed suicide. That's how Asheville entered the Depression. It froze our town. But if you think about what before that, what was going on in our community is we were changing at the scale of 10% of population every single year through the 1920s. We were rapidly growing. And back then we went from a town of wooden structures downtown to a town of stone and brick buildings. So what I see with a lot of tension in communities is people want to maintain a strong small town feel, but the next thing you know, there are 100,000 people. We're working with a community in Arizona. It's the town of Gilbert, Arizona. The town of Gilbert, Arizona is 160,000 people. How are you a town with 160,000 people? And because they're psychologically keeping themselves in that mindset, they're not seeing that they actually have city problems, right? And I think that's the thing is if you're adding population, you need to start changing your questions. You need to start rethinking where you're going, unless you want to put up a drawbridge and not let anybody else in, which is impossible. Because that's also there's going to be effects there too, where you're going to start to see housing prices go through the roof, and you're going to be in Sun Valley's position where they literally have to import 7,000 people a day into Little Ketchum, double their city's population. So they only have one road in, and they're causing all of these other problems in that road. So again, there are examples where we can find models of folks that have kind of made choices similar, and we can bring those to you.
You make a comment, one of the phenomena of the rest of the U.S. is the strip malls. In the city that I'm a part of, we in our boulevard that we want to identify for our forthcoming Main Street, we only incorporated the city 17 years ago.
We have just all these strip malls with the inherent parking lots and cons and then while we've identified where we'd like our routes, we give them comments on how to incentivize this flip other than just saying, well, again, you make a comment about just do away with your parking ratio, parking space ratio. But if you make any other comments, that's, I think, one of our big.
Yeah, for folks that have gone through a wave of development, you have a certain typology built. One is it's going to depend on land ownership. Who's a willing landowner that's willing to redevelop? How do you make we've made the strip mall and the single-use subdivision the default inside our zoning codes and our planning processes. It's easy to get that done. We've neglected and made more difficult the infill, the stuff that makes us more robust. We've essentially made it illegal to do what our grandparents were doing, like what you saw in downtown Magna. Like that would be illegal to do today. Yet there those miners are building it, right? So oftentimes our zoning codes are an inertia that we've created our own problems. There's a lot of different things you can do. Getting rid of your parking requirements is one. Having a 2-story minimum on the ground on a main street. Just say you can't do anything but a 2-story development here. You can't come in and underbuild in our community. I was a zoning administrator in West Palm Beach, Florida, and we did that in 1998. And it was because we were terrified of getting more fast food joints in our downtown. It's our most expensive infrastructure in our downtown, and somebody can just waltz in and drop a McDonald's in there. That's not going to help our pedestrian activity. That's not going to help our density. We don't need that. So it was kind of a naive way of just setting a bar. What I would argue is that if you go back to the Eugene model that I showed and think through what's our investment as a public, what did our corporation give to that property to make it active? What do we pay the snowplow to go by? What do we pay the pipe? And what do we pay for the cost of service? And is this development above or below that return on investment? Are they paying taxes above or below that? And once you run those numbers, you'll see the strip mall is going to be down here. So you're essentially subsidizing that developer to sit on that land and use it. There's ways to change that. You can charge. There are cities that are doing it's called transportation utility fee. They're treating the road as a true utility, which it is. It's an infrastructure. When I send a pipe to your house, actually, let me show you an example. This is Eugene. Super sexy stuff to talk about. Sewers. Let's talk about sewers. This is their sewer maps. This is all of their sewerage basins. So we sat down with the public works director, and this is a map of how the sewer system works. Each of these colors is its own neighborhood of sewers. You could literally we could pull all of this brown one out right there, and the whole system could stand on its own, right? So that's a neighborhood of sewers. And when I was talking with the engineer, I said, when everybody flushes their toilet, do they all pay the same per gallon rate? And the engineer's like, yes, that's fair. I said, so it's totally fair. He goes, definitely. Everybody pays the same rate. I said, so these folks up here have 8 of these pink things. Those pink things are lift stations. Does anybody know what the cost of lift station is in their community? Anyone? What's the cost?
Anywhere from 40.
Yeah. At Eugene, it was $1 million a lift station. To clean them annually is about $50,000 per lift station. So that one neighborhood up there has $20 million worth of infrastructure that no other neighborhood has, right? So I said, how is that fair that the whole community is picking up the cost of that subsidy to that neighborhood? And the engineer started freaking out because it's Eugene, they're very conscious. And he's like, I didn't know it was a subsidy. I'm like, I understand. That's your practice. So we just have to go back to the council and say, is this what you intended? And what they did is they just adjusted the fees. That's a way to handle it. You can be more sophisticated. The further out the pipe, think of it from snow plowing. If you've got 100 feet of frontage to plow, that's way more expensive than somebody's got 20 feet of frontage, right? So think of your utilities that way, and you should have differential rates. You should have geospatial rates. There's ways to take it to the. You're shaking your head no. Is it too hard?
I'm shaking my head about it. So I was on the part of the road.
Okay.
Solid.
Okay.
Okay, and I have 7 homes in my part of it. I have to provide my own snow plow. we have now eliminated snow cones on the road at all. Because the two neighbors that live on the very end of it refused to pay the fee. We've all agreed on it, but they've only got 10 feet. So to me, while I understand that you were talking about how we usually evaluate it, it's very difficult to come back in and say, we're going to charge you guys $10, and we're going to charge you guys $40.
Oh yeah, no, people will complain, definitely. There's a great colonial barb. Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fellow behind the tree. Like we used to say that as colonists. What did we cause a revolution over?
Taxation, of course.
Yeah, people don't like to pay for things. That's perfectly natural. You know, and it's like, but the thing is to sit down there and say in public, now for you, okay, you've only got like 8 people to work out and y'all 8 couldn't get together and work it out. So, okay, get some snowmobiles, put them at the end of the road and then you all snowmobile in. It's, you're in a situation, and how do the other people feel now that you've been put in this situation where you're all locked down?
Right now, nothing's happening. The people that live at the very end will plow with our own equipment to the very end. The people on the front end don't plow theirs at all.
Yeah.
So now it's difficult for us to get in. And it's even more difficult for them to get in.
Yeah.
So it's creating its own problem by not working together as a community to provide the service for this people.
And
Same, you have the same mission.
There's 8 individuals right on a private road that it was a private road, so they had to pay for their own services. You had to pay for your own plowing. And 2 individuals that have the smallest frontage chose to not opt in, which stopped the service because the other 6 of y'all are just like, we're not going to cover your weight. We're not going to let you be the free rider on our system. The free rider syndrome is a very common economic quagmire for most communities. You know, I would advocate that you put the data out there. The 8 people get together. You're in a much more difficult situation because you're complicated by being on a private system. For the public, that elevates into a public conversation. And what we advocate is make sure the public understands what the minority free riders are doing. And if you present that information in a way that they can understand it, they may choose to subsidize the minority position. But as long as it's a public vote and a public conscious decision, you can't, adults can be adults. That's fine. You know, it's like you're in a situation where you're probably going to have a couple bitter winners where y'all are going to start hating each other. I mean, that's going to happen. It's already happened. But in a public, you at least can do a vote, and the leadership could make a decision for the tribe in a better way. You don't have that ability on that road. Yeah, that's a great example. It's a common example. We see a lot of places that have private roads and they turn around and want the city to pay for the road once they've lived on it for 20 years and then have to actually figure out the cost, that they're not cheap. Roads are super expensive. That rebuild period, what developers do, and what Chuck will get into with the Strong Towns book, and also we have lots of examples with this, is that as communities are growing, that first wave of development that just goes out, the developer builds the roads and buries it into the mortgage of the properties, and then the roads come back onto you. You don't realize the cost of that obligated carry until the road comes in the future. And basically, the American system of development hasn't paid for itself. And we're all collectively going through this trauma together. Every city across the country is going through this. Roads aren't cheap. And we built miles and miles of roads. That's a whole other conversation that we can get into. We'd be happy to get into it. Trust me, Strong Towns and us would love that.
Okay, we've got two more questions, one online. We'll take one in the room and then we'll pivot and try to hook Chuck up, and it's going to work this time. Okay. So the question online here is, have you done any studies, seen any developments that are built for future mixed use, but the developer says commercial doesn't work yet? So the ground floor is vacant and residential is on top. What is the immediate taxable impact and does it outweigh the future potential?
We have done develop that. That is common. It's going to depend on the population growth. It's not monolithic. We have, don't force the developer to do something that the market won't provide. But in the case of if this were a public-private development, actually, you know what? Let me just show this example. This is one that we experienced this. And I'm saying this is somebody that worked in real estate development. This is a project that we did when I was with Public Interest Projects. And we owned this land. It was a surface parking lot with a hot dog joint right there called the Hot Dog King. It was a dump. There was nothing there. But we also owned that parking lot. We knew what the parking demand was. The city did a parking plan that they needed 700 parking spaces in this part of downtown. So we were hit by hotel developers that wanted to buy our land to do a hotel and just sell the land outright to them. And we're like, no, we're not going to do that. You'll do your hotel. We'll work with the city to build a parking garage. We're going to build affordable housing on the backside and then another housing building that's going to sit like a stirrup over the parking garage. As the community was working this out, it was kind of funny. Like the city attorney could you imagine working out a condo with the city? We did. And I told my boss, I was like, look, you don't just give people a condo document, show it to them as a graphic. So it was like a 60-page condo document. Like what politician, you're busy all day. You've got somebody's dog bit somebody that week. You've got to deal with that fire, don't make it hard for people, make it easy. So this is the fee simple garage that the city owns. PIP, Public Interest Projects, is going to have air rights. We're buying air rights over the top of the deck, and we're going to have fee simple over here. So we're wrapping taxes around a public amenity. Here's the hotel. And we were treated like garbage. That's us being treated like fat cat developers. I mean, we didn't need to do this. We could have just sold to the developer and walked away. It was in the city's master plan to do this parking garage with public amenities around it on our land. We're like, look, we're helping you, city, build this project. So there it is, 3/4 of the way built. The hotel's there. We just finished the housing on the backside. This presentation I made at our State of the Downtown address in 2019. So I'm like, look, here's what we paid in taxes in 2008, and here's what we paid last year. Right? So that's a 3,000% increase in taxes, and the public gets a parking garage out of it. To show you from a graphic perspective, that's 11,500 next to 300,000. So we're making good money for the city. Now, if we took our money, if we just sold it to the hotel developer, paid off the site and walked away, we could have invested our money in other downtown real estate and it would have doubled in value. Or we could have put our money in the NASDAQ and got 6 times our money out of it. That's what we could have done. But we wanted our public to grow wealth, and this is what the public got out of it. That's the wealth that's in taxes grown on that property. And it's a 40-year bond that they're going to pay off in year 20. So that means from year 20 to 40, that deck is going to be straight revenue to the city. It's already paying, I think, what, $18,000 to subsidize the transit system. So this is how we're building that wealth with our community. This is what you can do. It's still a public good. It's a public parking garage. The public gets a revenue. The hotel pays double the private rate for parking on it. So that's how we do that.
Last call for a question in the room. Any questions?
Let me one more comment on how to do incentivized transit. We're finally getting a little bit of traction in our state legislature for the development office. Affordable mobility is everything for the housing.
Well, in this case, it's like a straight. Yeah, the question was, how do you incentivize development or how do you fund transit, right? This is one way to do it. That this is just one little project. What you could do is, this is a different example, but there's like a tax district. This is what Leander, Texas did. And this is a very suburban area outside of Austin. This was a little bit of a crazy project. This developer got a hold of 115 acres outside the Leander train station. Austin's right here, and the region ran a train line out to Leander. Leander is the next county over from Austin's county, which is Travis County. These folks out there, they didn't really want the train station. They don't really care to cultivate it. They dropped like box stores and stuff like that. When you have transit, you want to get people as close to that transit as possible because you don't take your car on the train with you, right? And plus the region is investing in a college. So this developer's like, I'm going to build a village here. Now, what he's doing from a standpoint of development is it's going to be high density. It's going to require a lot of infrastructure, not cheap. The reason why developers don't do this kind of stuff is because building sidewalks, plazas, parks, and high density streets are very expensive. So they usually do the least amount of investment possible that they can float with the residential adjacent to it. So the developer's like, hey, could you maybe forego some tax for a couple of years, 15 years, and then we'll pay full freight after that. So just give us a little tax break for a little bit and we'll pay back. Now the community didn't quite understand this. A couple of citizens told me, like, well, you're just giving a tax break to the developer. You're just giving money patting that developer's pockets. Like, well, hold on a second. Let's just look to see what's happening. Now, developments don't happen, particularly this large, takes time. It's expensive. It's a lot of brain damage. So here's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. It's going to take close to 25 years to build this thing out. So here's what you currently have. This town incorporated in 1976. They didn't really have a downtown. Here they are. This is their development. There you are. This is phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. It's a completely different animal than anything that you're used to because you're all just strip malls and subdivisions right now. You never had a downtown. So you didn't have Magna. You didn't have these miners that built you some wealth into the future. And to show you, your cousins had it. There's Georgetown. You can tell where its downtown is. And here's Round Rock's downtown. So you're going to be building yours right there. Bam. What was crazy about this is it took the average value of their community from $275,000. It basically doubles the average value per acre of the entire city with a 100-acre project. Now, it's not fair to say the developer is just getting a free gift. The developer is getting this light blue gift. And it's really not a gift. It's just they're not paying for building that infrastructure that you're going to own. They're building that infrastructure. But they are paying half the taxes. So we just went ahead and cut the model right here at 2025 to show what half taxes looks like. This one looks like halfway full. So we just turned the thermometer on halfway. And even at halfway, it dwarfs everything else around it because it's the density. So this is it built out in 2038. So two of the city councilors were just like, we don't want this. We just want a strip mall. We just want a Target and a Best Buy and whatever. And we're like, all right, fine. Here's the development. Here's if you do nothing and do the Best Buy, the Target and whatever. There you go. So here's the question. Do you want a $60 million development or do you want to invest 20 and yield 700? Do you want 60 or invest 20 and yield 700? It's your choice. You get to vote on this. I'm going back to Asheville. They ended up voting 5-2. The 2 no votes never changed their opinion. In fact, one of them during the council meeting, she basically insinuated that she wasn't part of the deal as a commercial broker, so she's voting against it. Welcome to Texas. I was like, wow, you just said that out loud. That's awesome. It's like this. The thing is, this is how you show information. During the break, 2 of the counselors came down to me, and one of them said, we've been talking about this for 2 years and nobody made it easy to understand. And you just showed me that big purple thing next to the little green thing. I want the purple thing. I was like, okay. It's like, for the professionals in the room, we don't make it easy for people to understand this stuff. And that should be our number one goal. People are busy. Elected officials are busy. The neighbors on your street are busy, but they need to see the information and the cause and effect. Now, will your neighbors change behavior? Probably not. This isn't to say that all people are wonderful. You're not going to get 100% unanimous anything. People are people, but the group needs to make group decisions. Now, if you had the choice to vote on your street, you'd vote them out, but you don't have that choice when you have private roads. So
All right. Thank you very much for all your patience. We appreciate it. We have all systems go. Folks online, we're going to have you stay online after Chuck finishes up and ask questions while the in-person folks can go break for lunch at 11:45. And then we will be able to have Joe for more question and answers for the in-person folks after that, if you guys are here and eager and willing. So I'm very pleased again to introduce Chuck Marone with Strong Towns, a great friend to the league. Chuck has been to several of our conferences over the years. Also, his colleague Edward Uford is also online. Chuck, as you know, if you don't know or haven't seen our Strong Towns presentations before, he's a civil engineer and a land use planner, so don't hold that against him. But he's also president of the Strong Towns, a nonprofit organization. He holds a bachelor's degree and a master's of urban regional planning from the University of Minnesota. And he's also author of the Strong Towns book, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuilding American Prosperity, as well as Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for Strong Towns. I think Joe had an image of that up on the site earlier. They have podcasts, and they are also going to be partners with us in these workshops as we proceed around the state. And don't forget, we'll put that up at the end to register online for the upcoming in-person workshops that we'll be holding February through May. In a region close to you. We'll be traveling throughout the state to do a hands-on tools assessment and get you really feeling good about how to implement some of these strategies in your town. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chuck. Chuck, hello.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's very nice to be here. And yes, apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm glad we've got things straightened out. Typically when Joe and I present together, I go first. And I know that's how we were scheduled to do this today. I was going to go first. And I go first because a lot of what we talk about at Strong Towns and the issues that we identify, the challenges that we discuss, a lot of the answers to that comes with the work that Urban 3 is doing and Joe's team is working on. Joe and I met first many years ago in Madison, Wisconsin. I got up and gave a presentation about how the development pattern that I had worked on as a civil engineer, that I had worked on as a land use planner, was creating this situation where cities, local governments, communities of people were induced to have incentives to do things that gave them cash today. We run that sewer and water pipe out to the edge of town. We connect a bunch of businesses and new homes. This generates cash flow for us today. But when we look at the long-term liabilities of this, and we actually look at the amount of tax base we create, the amount of revenue that generates, the amount of costs or the different fees and taxes and things that we have coming in, and we compare them long term to the cost of servicing and maintaining that infrastructure, what we find is that it doesn't come anywhere near. We have been able to generate quite a bit of instant growth, quite a bit of instant prosperity in our system by having our cities, by having our local governments take on enormous long-term financial liabilities. I got up and presented, and when I got done, Joe gave me a fist bump, said, "Wow, that was amazing." And then Joe got up and Joe answered the question that I had been struggling with, which is what does work? My experience as a civil engineer working in small towns really across Minnesota, my experience as a land use planner doing work in similar cities and in cities across the Midwest got me to this situation where I really questioned what does work? What are the things that we see out there that actually cash flow financially, that actually pay off, that actually are resilient over the long run? And it was Joe's work and Joe's insights and the insights of Urban 3 looking at land use productivity that helped me understand cities of the past, why they were built the way they were built, and how we can learn from them and adapt those insights to today. So what I want to do is go back a little bit to maybe where we would have started today, give you a little kind of Strong Towns 101 on city building and development, and kind of set up not just the overall conversation that Joe is having, but the workshops that we're going to do later this year. Because what we're trying to do in conjunction with the league is to help cities across Utah, cities that are big, small, rural, suburban, urban, understand their finances, their financial equations as a long-term productivity problem and take steps to deal with that. We have a lot of tools in the toolbox, but we have to actually ask a different set of questions. This photo right here is Brainerd, Minnesota. This is my hometown. This is where I'm at today. I'm broadcasting from the Franklin Arts Center, which when I was a youngster was the Franklin Junior High School. I went to school here. I actually met my wife here back in 8th and 9th grade. And now it is an arts center building, kind of a great example of what Joe was talking about reuse. This is what my town looked like back in 1870. And I'm going to point out here that amid this collection of pop-up shacks, and just little nondescript buildings, this is basically where every city in Utah was at some point in the past as well. Every city that began prior to the Great Depression began just like this. Some little pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about the future. In our case here, some settlers showed up. They cut down the trees that were there. They planed out the woods and they popped up these little shacks. No one expected these to last very long. No one was building for, in a sense, like a permanent situation. The idea was here, let's try some things and see what happens. Let's try some things and see what works. If we step back and look at the history of our area, there were a number of these that were put into place. Most of them actually went away or didn't amount to much. This one did for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons were social reasons. It was, the right mix of people in the right place. Some of them were exterior forces, right? Brainerd, as opposed to Barrows, Crow Wing Town. So, some of these other places, Brainerd was the place that got the railroad to come through and got the river crossing. So it became important functionally because of that transportation investment. But what we saw here in places that were successful, that got beyond this kind of infant phase or this embryonic stage of a city, was a certain pattern of growth, a pattern of growth that we see repeated throughout human history around the world. The buildings would start to grow incrementally up. The city would grow incrementally out, and the structures would become incrementally more intense. It's a kind of thickening process. You can think of a culture in a lab in a petri dish, how it grows incrementally in different directions. In the city's case, this center of town was, the most valuable piece of real estate around. That's not saying much. These places weren't worth a lot. But as more and more people would move to this place, these kind of cheap, hastily erected buildings would start to fall apart. As they were falling apart, the underlying land value, because of all the people moving here, would actually start to go up. That difference between the underlying land value and the value of the building on it would create this natural redevelopment pressure. And what you would see is that while the city continued to grow, these little shacks would get torn down and replaced with buildings that were more substantial. That first photo was in 1870. This photo is 1904. So a little more than a generation later, what you have now is a city that is far more mature, right? If we were to go out, this is actually the same exact city, the same exact street in the same exact city in kind of the same place, right? Very similar place. These are the actual replacement buildings of those first little pop-up shack buildings. There's a parade going through town, and a nice color portrait was done in celebration. I'm not suggesting there's this many people on the street all the time in downtown Brainerd in 1904, but you can see that, this is a city that has matured quite a bit from those original photos. If we go out a couple blocks off of this street, what we would find is building and development that is at an intensity that would be more like this, right? Some of it might be residential, small scale. Some of it might be commercial, small scale, but it would be at this intensity. In the center of town, we have the next generation, the next iteration of intensity. And that's what you see here. Over multiple decades, the city would continue to grow. It would follow that same traditional development pattern, growing incrementally out, incrementally up, and becoming incrementally more intense. Things thickening up over time, the city becoming more valuable, more productive as the buildings and the uses and the things that we were doing became likewise. And what you saw is 40 years after this photo, this exact same street would look like this. The wood structures have been replaced with buildings of brick and granite. This is a incremental development process, a process of small bets leading to an awareness of what works and what doesn't work, what is needed and what is not needed. That awareness then recycling into a renewal of a new version of the city and ultimately a new version, each one becoming, in a sense, more permanent, more impressive, more, to use Joe's language, financially productive. This is the kind of natural iteration of a city. And I'm going to show you the next iteration, and then I'm going to back up because I want to point out something that is subtle in these photos that you might not have caught. This is from the 1940s. If we fast forward to today, we have a brand new way of building, a brand new way of building places. We build them all at once. We build them to a finished state. We no longer have this kind of messy iteration of renewal and things being little bets being torn down and redeveloped. So if we look, this exact same street today looks like this. You'll notice that the large buildings are gone, right? They've been torn down to make way for parking lots. For the most part, there's a couple other things that are in there of a little bit lesser value. Downtown Brainerd is, it has some nice spots. Front Street, the street I've been showing you the whole time, is not one of them. You can see that this street is a collection of half-occupied buildings and buildings that have been converted into parking. It's a rather sad kind of street. And I'm going to point out one thing, and then we're going to go back. In this street, you have $500,000 of public infrastructure. If you add up the bituminous, the aggregate, the concrete sidewalks, the sewer pipe, water pipe, stormwater system, the catch basins, the valves, the street lights, all the public investments in this street, you've got over $500,000 invested just in this little stretch. Where's the wealth that we as a community can tap into to sustain that investment? Where are the people who are paying the utility fees, paying the property taxes, paying the things that we need in order to have that money to fix and take care of this stuff over the long term? Those things used to be there, right? They've been there for generations, but they're no longer there. I want to point out something subtle here because it's going to build on a lot of what we, I think, talk about when I visit Utah and we get in our workshops, and certainly it builds on Joe's insights about productivity. I want you to look at the public investment that is here in this earliest version of my hometown. What is the collective public investment? If there were a local government here, and I think there actually was a city of Brainerd, I think it actually was incorporated. So there would have been a mayor, there would have been aldermen at the time they called them. There would have been people here who voted on things. What were they voting on? What was the public infrastructure? There was none, right? I mean, they might have been voting on, whether to have Sunday liquor or not, or, who to be the sheriff or, that kind of thing. But they weren't voting on building the next road project or building the next sewer and water project. They didn't have any of those things. If anything, they might have had a bucket brigade across the hill here would have been the Mississippi River. And I suppose if things would have caught on fire there, people would have moved in with buckets as quick as they could. But there was no public infrastructure, so to speak, right? There was no big public investment that they were doing. I want you to have that in mind as we go to the next stage here. Because what you have here is something, and I don't quite know exactly what the public's role would have been in this, like what the local government would have been responsible for here. But what you see is, wooden sidewalks, this kind of collective investment. You put wooden sidewalks in front of your place, you connect them to the next one. How much of that was done privately because it just made sense for the businesses to do? How much of it was part of a chamber of commerce or a community club or what have you? And how much of it was the public? I don't know. But what you're seeing here is some type of communal effort to coordinate and to work together for mutual benefit. That was very common in this type of environment, because if you're going to build a building in a downtown like this, you want your sidewalks to connect to everybody else, right? You want to have ample space for people to gather. You want to have, your front windows open to the public. You want to have a door out front. You want to have a kind of a symmetry of design. There's certain things that you would do in this kind of human habitat to make sure that it thrived. And you would do those things looking after your own best interests, but they also happen to reflect positively on everybody around you. There's a street here, and the street looks like it's graded, at least to a little degree. And so that suggests that there's some, additional coordination, whether that's a local government or not. I don't think there was a water system here. There might have been a drinking water system put in place, but there's no record of a water tower or anything like that. People probably had pumps, and they probably had latrines out behind their shops. So very little in the way of public investment, yet a whole lot of private investment, a whole lot of overall productivity. Here's where you start to notice the public investment, right? You can see in the middle of the street, there's a drain. The street is now paved. It's got concrete sidewalks. You have street lights. That would be a kind of a collective public investment. That drain in the middle was probably the sewer and the stormwater. That was pretty common at the time, especially since the Mississippi River is right over here. You would run it over that way. Not suggesting that is optimum, but that was what would have been done at the time. But recognize here that you are getting a significant public investment, paved streets, some type of underground utilities, lights. That's a significant public investment. The public, the community as a whole, has committed a large amount of money, not just to building these things, but the long-term commitment to keep and maintain them. But it has done that either simultaneously or after, and most likely, mostly after, the private investment is in place to sustain that. You would not have found this level of public investment throughout other parts of the community because the private investment wasn't there to sustain it. You didn't have enough there to justify all of these public improvements and obligations. Now we go to today, and you can see that alarmingly, we don't really care about the private-public relationship. We're not very bothered by the fact that we don't have a lot of private tax base. We don't have a lot of taxpayers. We don't have a lot of revenue coming in, people paying for the sewer, people paying for the water. We don't fret over that too much. Despite the fact that we are actually now today, as opposed to this period of time where we were comparatively a very wealthy city, we're now a very poor city, a city with high taxes, high levels of debt, very impoverished population, and a lot of financial difficulties. Somehow, yet, it hasn't translated us into caring very deeply about this conundrum. Why is that? And this is the question I want to answer for you, and I want to really to leave you with, because through the Great Depression and World War II, we changed our philosophy. We changed our approach, not only towards the overall macroeconomy, but towards growth in general. And, we look back historically and we recognize the Depression as a very difficult time. I think today we are so far separated from it that I think some of the poignancy of it is lost on us today. My grandfather talked about the Great Depression to me and described it as a extremely difficult time. He lived in a barn at the neighbor's place. His parents he moved out and he moved in, and the adjacent farmer let him live there if he would help out on the farm. My grandpa got to sleep in the barn and was fed by this family. And he told me that he felt very lucky. I've always kind of used that as an anchor point for trying to understand the Depression because, textbooks give things like 25% unemployment and 40% of people losing their homes. And I mean, these really, really like high numbers. It's the human part that really weighs on us though, right? My grandpa felt lucky to be able to live in the barn because he had a roof over his head and food. He said a lot of people were not that lucky. I try to understand this generation because when they got out of the Great Depression and they got out of World War II, the biggest fear that they had was that now that we're going to shut down all these industries of war, now that we're going to demobilize all these people, we are almost certain to just slide right back into depression. We're almost certain to see our economy go back to where it was before World War II, because why wouldn't it? What is different? But what happened, of course, in retrospect, we can see is that what we did is we took all of these industries that had been building ships and tanks and bombs and munitions and what have you to fight a war, and we repurposed those into building this new version of America. And not only was it a new version of America, it was actually a new kind of human habitat. It was a human habitat built all at once and built to a finished state. In other words, we would go in and we would build complete neighborhoods that would be completely done, full of homes that were completely done. And by complete, I keep saying this word completely done, because there was no iteration here. There was no vision that things would change and evolve. We were building them, and it's fascinating because you can go back and read the way that they talked about it at the time. We are building them correct. We are building them, in a sense, perfect from the start. And so there was no need to consider how trends might change, things might change, buildings would go into decline, would need to be renewed. We were building them right the first time, and building them this way would create for us this kind of endless prosperity. Not only that, but if we could turn our cities into engines of growth, what we as Strong Towns have called kinetic growth machines. If we could turn our cities into kinetic growth machines, not only could we not could we resist the idea that we would slide back into depression? Not only could we keep our economy humming and moving and out of depression, but we could create a strong country, one that would see a growing middle class, would see us become the economic leader of the entire world, one that would see us, defeat communism, do all the things that were their obsessions at the time. Building the growth city was centered to that strategy. And we live with that today. I'm going to show you, and these are actually maps that Joe's team at Urban 3 have produced that I think tell this story better than anything. I want you to visualize this transition from incremental development over time to kinetic growth machine. This is Fresno, California. And again, we're using maps of Fresno, not because I think there's any city in Utah that is specifically like Fresno, but because we've got great maps of Fresno. And trust me, you're going to see your community, regardless of the size, you're going to see it reflected in this trend. This is a trend of North American cities, not cities of a specific, place and time. Here's the boundaries of Fresno in 1897, and watch as this incremental development pattern continues up until the end of World War II. 1909, here's 1922, here's 1934, and then we get to the end of World War II. And you can envision, you see that, even during the Great Depression, even during difficult times, Fresno continued to grow. It continued to have some growth, some expansion. It wasn't fast growth, it wasn't rapid growth, but it was some. But it was on that pattern of incrementally out, incrementally up, this incremental maturing and thickening up within neighborhoods. Now watch what happens at the end of World War II. We demobilize, we shift our industrial base to building the kinetic growth machine that our cities have become. We're going to have a new version of America spread across the landscape. Here we are in Fresno, 1958. 1970, 1983. Here's the mid 1990s. And then the last image we have is from 2010. If we look at my city, Brainerd, Minnesota, at the end of World War II, it was 13,500 people. Today, Brainerd, Minnesota is 13,500 people, the same population. We are 10 times the area. There's been a lot of talk recently about Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson, Mississippi's water system has failed and failed in a kind of a spectacular way. We're seeing this as headlines now because people literally don't have water. But this has been an ongoing source of decline and failure for many, many years. We look back at Jackson, Mississippi, and one of the narratives of Jackson is one where, well, people have left Jackson, and there's talk about racial divides and white flight. And it was said over and over again, including in the New York Times and the Washington Post, that Jackson has lost population. This is not true. From the end of World War II till today, the city of Jackson has gained somewhere, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 10, 15, 20%, somewhere in that range. It's a very modest amount of growth, but they've actually gained population. The challenge with the city of Jackson is that they've increased their land area by over 3 times, over 300%. So much more stuff now to be maintained. Like in my city, 10 times the area, same amount of people. 10 times the area to provide police protection and fire protection, 10 times the area to provide road access and sewer and water and drainage. Same population. This is where the financial problem starts to rear its ugly head. Not in that first generation of kinetic growth. Not when everything is new and everything is fancy and everything feels good, because with those things, we generally have figured out how to pay for them, right? We can get a federal government grant. We can get a state grant. We can have a developer come in and pay for the utilities. We can have people assume the first cycle costs in their mortgage payment. We found really good ways to build things. What we struggle at, and we struggle at it for very sound financial reasons, is in maintaining stuff, taking care of it, having it renew itself over multiple life cycles. This is data that Joe's team at Urban 3 and I were able to collect out of Lafayette, Louisiana. And it paints this picture that I'm trying to show you in really stark terms. Lafayette, Louisiana has been a very successful city post-World War II. At the end of World War II, they had a population of a little over 33,000. Today, it's around 120,000. It's a 3.5 times rate of growth. It's an enormous amount of growth. Lafayette, by all measurements, has been a very successful city in this period, in this post-war development pattern. But this data came from a water map that allowed us to look back to 1949 at the water system in the city of Lafayette. And what we found is that when we look back in 1949, at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide drinking water for the people of Lafayette, Louisiana. Today, it takes 10 times that amount. It takes 50 feet of pipe per person. If we go back to the end of World War II, what we see is that it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people in order to provide fire protection for the citizens of Lafayette. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. It takes 51.3 fire hydrants per 1,000 people. Okay, I think you could make the argument, and I think, the core assumption that I had in my early days of engineering was, I get this, like I see this. We've got a lot more pipe now. We've got a lot more hydrants now. We've got a lot more road now. We've got a lot more stuff now, right? But we're so much richer. Americans today are so much better off than Americans at the end of World War II and the Great Depression. We make more money. We have more wealth. We certainly have more stuff. If you go into our homes, you will see many more TVs and electronics and gadgets and appliances. You'll see families owning more cars. They're bigger cars. They're powerful vehicles. Yes, Chuck. Okay, fine. We've got way more pipe, but we're way better off. We're way wealthier today than we used to be. That was my assumption. And the sad thing is that assumption is actually wrong. It's actually not borne out by the numbers. If we go back to 1950 and we look at the median household income, how much was a family making? A family in 1950 was making in today's dollars $27,700 in the city of Lafayette. Today, that same family makes $45,000. Now, yes, that is more, but that's a 1.6 times increase. We've increased our just public liabilities by 10x, by 20x. How do we expect people to keep up with this? How do we expect our populations, which are now spread out in a system that is really, really expensive to maintain? But as you look at Joe's work and the work of Urban 3, financially is not nearly as productive, does not generate as enough wealth, as many connections, as many fees, as much stuff just organically. How do we expect families that are only 1.6 times higher income to be able to afford all this? How do we look at families that actually have lower net worths than any time in the last 50 years? We have more families with negative net worths now than at any time post World War II. How do we expect families like that to be able to pay to sustain this stuff? We can't, because they can't physically do it. I want to end with this example, and then Edward and I are going to be happy to not only discuss this with you here in a Q&A, but I know we're going to do a little private thing too. And then, previewing us coming to Utah and being part of an ongoing conversation of how we actually do this in specific places. This is just up the street from me here in my hometown. This is actually the school I'm in right now would be on a block off the far left of the screen that you're looking at. I want you to focus on these two blocks because you'll see that they're identical size. You've got the identical area. From a community standpoint, they have the exact same amount of public investment. They're in the same neighborhood, the same thoroughfare, the same amount of sewer and water, the same amount of roadway. Everything is an apples to apples comparison here, except for the style of development. This neighborhood was built in the 1920s. So the original two photos that I showed you of my hometown, the pop-up shacks, that would have been 1870. That core downtown expansion you saw was 1904. In 1904, you had North Brainerd, you had other neighborhoods being built. This neighborhood here started to be built in around the 1920s. And these three blocks, the two blocks I'm highlighting you and the one in between, all kind of looked like that block on the left. This was the pop-up shack equivalent of the 1920s. Remember that 1870s line of pop-up shacks I showed you? This is the equivalent of that for the 1920s. People out on the edge of town built the cheapest kind of buildings that they could. They popped up the first generation of stuff out here. And the assumption of the people who built those, because they had thousands of years of human history to draw from and seeing this happen over and over and over again, not only across North America, but across the world. Their assumption was, I'll build this kind of the best investment I can, but a cheaper investment, knowing that in a generation, maybe a decade, 2 decades from now, this neighborhood will continue to grow, to thicken up, to add people, to add shoppers, right? Patrons, people who will go to my business. And over time, I will build a second story, build an addition on the back. I'll tear down this building and make it more ornate, more wealthy. I will make money from the success of the surrounding neighborhood, and I'll be able to use that to either improve the building or sell it and move and do something else. This was a really good investment on the edge of town. Of course, things didn't proceed that way, right? You had these built in the 1920s, then you had the Great Depression, then you had World War II. Then we have a new approach of cities as kinetic growth machines. And our development pattern just skipped way over these places and started building out on the edge. Hyper growth out, like we showed you with the Fresno drawing. These places have stagnated, and they've stagnated for now a century. 2 blocks over, so the block on the right used to look just like the block on the left. They were very, very similar in their style and design. The city labeled this block on the right blight. We went in, got the buildings torn down, got it redeveloped, and now we have the new Taco John's drive-through franchise restaurant. I think you have Taco John's in Utah. If you don't, these are very, very popular in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or this part of the world. You can think of this as like Norwegian Mexican food. So lots of salts and bland cheddar cheeses. I will admit to liking Taco John's to a degree. The moral of the story, though, was that everybody was super excited about this transition, right? We got rid of blight. We now have something shiny and new. The new thing not only looks good, it looks to people seeing through like we're more successful than this rundown blighted thing, but it meets every requirement in our zoning code. It meets the zoning standards. It's got the right amount of parking. It's got a little bit of green space. They even put some native plants in the stormwater area. They put in a little bit of sidewalk. So we got some connectivity from a pedestrian standpoint. The sign meets the sign ordinance. The building has ADA compliant bathrooms and a sprinkler system, right? If you went down the checklist of all the things that we were concerned with, this meets all the checklist items. Here's the challenge. That block on the left, if you add up all the buildings and take that whole block, it has a value of $1.1 million. That block on the right, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, just a different style of development. Our new post-World War II kinetic growth style of development has as its value $618,000. Again, an apples to apples comparison. The traditional development pattern, the way we built cities for thousands of years, this incremental way of starting small and thickening up over time, that approach in its infant phase, after a century of decline and neglect, is still outperforming financially the stuff we're building brand new today. We all understand the future of the Taco John's franchise, right? 2 decades after this is built, this thing will be a used car lot or something like that. There'll be a new Taco John's up the road a little bit. Shortly after that, we'll be trying to get some type of tax subsidy to get it torn down and redeveloped. We've all been around long enough to see this work. There is a strength and a resiliency and a financial productivity of the traditional development pattern that we have casually overlooked in our kind of obsession to stay out of the next Great Depression at the end of World War II. We turned our cities into kinetic growth machines. And that pattern worked to keep us out of the Great Depression. But in exchange, what it has done is it has loaded up our cities with millions, billions of dollars of burden for stuff to maintain that we do not have the tax capacity. We do not have the number of users. We do not have the ability to maintain. And so the challenges that we face today are not about how do we continue building more of this stuff, but how do we shift our understanding so that we can start making private investments and public investments that support them that actually generate not only higher financial productivity, but greater desirability, greater prosperity on multiple fronts. That is our supreme challenge today. And it's the one that, I have a ton of respect for the League of the League of Utah Cities for being interested in this conversation, being interested in the long-term health and prosperity of its members, and really being kind of on the forefront of stewardship for what it means to run a successful place. There's no finger pointing here. We have all gone down this route. We've all been part of this big experiment. I'm often asked to point out the city that is doing it perfectly, doing it well, has it figured out. And I have to say, we all have been part of this. This is a national, continental-wide experiment that we are all taking part in. So there's no fingers to be pointed here. There's no blame to be assessed, as much as there is an understanding to be reached. We can't continue to do things this way. We have to have a deeper understanding, particularly of the financial impacts of our development pattern. And when we do, what we find and I think this is kind of the heart of Joe's presentation from earlier today, what we find is that there are a ton of things to be done. There are so many things that we can do that are very low lift that will make our situation much better. And we need to identify those things and start working on them. And that's part of what this project is about. And it's part of, why I'm so excited to be heading to Utah here in the coming months. So I'm going to pause right there. Thank you. If there are questions, I'm happy to field them, or if we're going to do breakout now, either way, we're good to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Chuck. We appreciate that. So thank you again for being so fluid today. What we're going to do now is take a few in-person questions and then have you guys break at 11:50 out for lunch. And then online folks, stay with us. And then Chuck will be all yours to ask questions. We'll just switch to a virtual component at that point. So anyone in the room, Liam has a mic so we can all hear the questions. Any questions for Chuck while we have his expertise online? None. Okay. Well, we can take one right over here. Great. Let's just get you the mic. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
Well, of course, and I want to say I'm so thrilled that Chuck Maroon is here, Ellen Burrell, Cottonwood Heights. And I will say that one of the conversations that many of us have, we know that the natural resources of water, energy, how energy, we think of our personal devices, and I just fell on my chair with a session on fiber lines for our community, and the presenter said something about how many personal devices were in this house, and I threw out a number. I said, "Well, I have 12." He said, "Well, we have 79," and I was so we live in a world that's so different than what it was, that it actually even magnifies what we've been talking about, how we juggle, the challenges of resources as well as just the sheer numbers of the development and encouraging the kind of development that's sustainable. So I'm just wondering if you have any comment, related to water. I mean, we think Utah, we're the second driest state that our people consume. We're the second most consumptive per capita of any state in the United States. So we don't have a Mississippi River flowing nearby. We do have our mountain range. Anyways, do you want to make any comment? And I know you'll be coming here to Utah and visiting throughout the state. Any comment related to natural resources?
Yes. And let me put it like this. I didn't enter this conversation through the environmentalism door. It in fact, and maybe I'll dig myself a little bit of a hole. Hopefully I can get out of it. In my work as a civil engineer and as a land use planner, I found that a lot of the stuff that came at me from an environmental standpoint really was counterproductive. The engineering reaction to all things environmental is to just build more stuff. And I always found that to be like a bad answer. We got this stormwater problem over here. Well, maybe we should not be developing a bunch of, no. Let's just build a big stormwater management system. I'm like, well, no place can really afford that. It doesn't make sense. Well, we have to do it from an environmental standpoint. I wound up in all these fights with environmentalists that were essentially fights over money. And it was such a weird place to be. It didn't make sense to me. And I struggled with it. And I kind of limited myself to looking at just the financial problem, because the finances of our cities, I spent half a decade in like the wilderness just trying to find any models that actually worked. I mean, I really thought that maybe I was crazy because I modeled every project that I had worked on, and none of them cash flowed out past one life cycle. And I'm like, how do cities exist today if this math is correct? What I ultimately found was not only this conversation, the Strung Downs conversation, which, by the way, we're having, but lots of other people are having too. But I found people like Steve Mozan and his book, The Original Green. And what Steve does is Steve actually talks about environmentalism in a language that I think is not only more applicable it reached me, it touched me. I was very inspired by it, but I think it's more applicable to the conversation we should be having. And it begins with this kind of insight that, and I'm not going to do it justice. And Ed, if you want to tweak what I'm going to say a little bit, feel free. It starts with this insight that there's not necessarily good and bad. I think our environmental debate has kind of evolved into that. If we look back in time at our ancestors, really in the broadest sense of the word, there was a lot of just prudent things that they did, because if you didn't do them, things went poorly for you. If you used all your water, you died. If you didn't, if you used up all your soil, you died. If you put your house in the wrong place with the wrong roof pitch in the wrong declination, you were going to be a lot colder and wetter and more miserable than people who did it in a different way. It just so happens that a lot of those things happen to be like really environmentally advantageous, because guess what? Humans are actually mammals, and our habitat has to survive in the landscape the same way that beehives and anthills and grizzly bear habitat has to also survive. So there's a lot of, I think, deep ecological insight in the book, The Original Green. And, my hope would be that as the environmental discussion kind of evolves to dealing with scarcity instead of merely projecting scarcity, that we learn some of those lessons from, Steve Mauzan and The Original Green, and really what our ancestors did to do a lot more with a lot less, quite frankly.
Hey, we've got one online we'll take, and then we got one online we'll take if there are no more in the room, and then we'll break in person here for lunch. And the online question was, how do we encourage incremental growth when most of the remaining land is owned by a few large development companies who still use, I don't know how to say it, who put things down once and move on?
Yeah.
Is there a policy change that can help us change this direction?
Well, let me say this in the starkest terms possible. And I recognize there's a lot of nuance to this, but I'll say it in a very get real kind of way, and then we'll move on from there. If we have cities that have more infrastructure than their tax base can sustain financially, we have more road, more pipe, more drainage system, then we have the money to actually fix. Then our development pattern cannot be one of where's the raw land that's yet to be developed and how do we run sewer and water and roadway to that raw land. Our development approach has to be, how do we take the existing places we have and make better use of them? That is really hard for people to get their minds around sometimes, because we have all grown up and lived in a system where development, growth, investment meant going to raw land and developing that, or going to some place that has failed so catastrophically that we could put some tax subsidy into place or something to reclaim that heroically and reuse it. But what it has also meant is that 90% plus of our neighborhoods are static, never changing, never anticipated to change. And if there's one takeaway from the presentation that I'm giving, it's that mentality, that awareness has to shift. Development can no longer be, here's the big piece of raw land, let's fight over what we do with that. Development has to be, here's a neighborhood where we're already serving it with sewer and water. How do we mature this neighborhood so that the tax base grows, the number of people grow, the number of connections grows, because we have a fixed cost. And as if you look at this as an accountant would, the public, we collectively, through the city government, through the city council, the local government, has a fixed cost for maintaining that street. What is variable is the amount of tax and usage on that fixed cost. And I mean, unless we're going to turn our paved roads into gravel, which, you know, there are places that are doing that, unless we're going to take out our sidewalks, unless we're going to get rid of the water in the sewer system when they fail over time, what needs to happen in order to take care of this stuff is that the private investment in those neighborhoods needs to go up comparable to the public investment. That is a different style of development. It's something we don't have our minds wrapped around yet. And I hope that people will spend some time thinking about what that might look like, because it looks like neighborhoods changing, and neighborhood change is something that we're conditioned to not like. We're conditioned to reject at kind of all costs. And I think that's the mental hurdle we need to work on.
Okay, great. Well, now we're going to pivot again. So online folks, take a beat. We're going to switch to just virtual for Chuck to answer your questions, of which there are some in the chat. And then in-person folks, lunch is served out in that room. And then after, say, a half hour or so, if you're still inclined, we have Joe here, to answer your questions. So please take advantage of that until about 1:30 hard stop. So thank you all, and we'll just switch over now.
Cool. Hey, Edward. Here's my question. Edward, maybe you know, maybe you don't. Do we have a method for answering questions here? Because is someone going to ask them, or is it just going to be you and I trying to figure this out?
Yeah. So if people have questions, they can enter either into the chat or into the question and answer.
Turn off the sound.
We'll take advantage of that, where people can go and put those questions in, and then we can just kind of have a conversation that way.
No, that's not doing anything. I turned it off.
I do know that if you enter them in the Q&A part, they're actually easier for us to answer. If you put them in the chat, what happens is that they tend to scroll up and we can see the last one, but we can't see the ongoing ones. If you put them in the Q&A, it's a lot easier for us to get to them and to answer them, because they actually pop up and then we can click on them and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it looks like we've got 90 people that are sticking around with us through lunch.
Yeah.
I wonder.
At the bottom of your screen is a question and answer. Please ask any questions you might have.
What if I just plug us in, we're just back?
Well, then
Or we don't care.
It'll
Actually.
just be on your laptop and not up there.
I think Meg's doing it.
Did it work?
There's a familiar face.
Hey, Meg, are you killing the sound?
There we go.
There we go. I
Perfect.
did it.
Nice work.
Hi, I'm joined you now. Sorry, we had to transition for a second. There was one question in the chat box. I don't know if you can, and we are trying to unplug Nick's computer, so I apologize as we're transitioning from live to virtual. There was a question in there, and I don't know if you guys want to take a stab at it about that Joe question, or if that's really a Joe question from Eric. I don't know. Do you guys see that, Edward? And
What's the question? I'm not seeing it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think it might.
So Joe was talking about placing a $20 million bet to redevelop an undeveloped area of town with the return of $700 million as a solution to rebalance the public-private rate of investment in locality. However, truly is that a small bet incremental step, or a more conductive to large finished state bet that can make people fear. So, Chuck, this goes back to the example that was shown of rethinking of a new downtown.
Yeah.
And, taking a big step.
turn that mic off or something up there? That one?
Yeah, we'll get let's get their
Just turn off all the audio. I can hear them. Yep.
A stoplight
Yeah,
and a circle.
we'll get them muted.
Yep.
So I'm just thinking.
Sorry, working on it.
It's okay. If you have access, if you have like controlling access, you can mute them on the right side under participants. You can just click on there. I can't do it. Oh, there they go. Now they're gone. Okay, so we're good. I do think let's you and I talk about this, because I think I don't even want to use the word tension, because I don't feel like there's a lot of tension between Urban 3 and Strong Downs. I mean, we're really like see eye to eye on so many things. I think from a development standpoint, if there is any tension, it does come down to this, like, what is the phasing on some of this stuff? The background of Urban 3 is in land development. And I think, modern land development tends to work in large leaps. I think Joe is respectful and mindful of the idea that risk is something that should happen in the private sector, not the public sector. But yet there is this tension because $700 million in creating a new downtown is not a small step. I feel like philosophically we can get on board with that vision. But I think like any vision, it would be in the implementation of it. And I mean, let's take this one idea. We're going to build a brand new downtown. How would you approach that from a Strong Towns way? How would you approach that from an incremental way instead of, having kind of this all at once to a finished state, big bet kind of approach?
Yeah. So if you look at the example that Joe showed, it's composed of streets, squares, and blocks. Mm-hmm. So the first thing with this is taking a large 100-acre tract. You don't build all the roads, phase one. You only build what you need. So at that 100-acre development, you already have public infrastructure on one side. So that's a starting point. You already have infrastructure. You can backfill on that. I also think, because part of that thinking is that there is some subsidy involved with that, some partnership to help get some of that infrastructure in or get some of the public space in. That doesn't occur with the municipality phase one. You really, when we talk about small bets, you've got to make sure that. So I've worked on a lot of these larger economic development projects, and there's a way to reinvest the tax dollars back into the project in a sensible way. But it's not 100% of the tax dollars. It's 10, 20% of what would be coming in. You reinvest into that project. So it does become incremental in its form, and it becomes incremental within its financing.
I do feel like there is, it is astounding to me how many places that I will work with, look at, talk to, where they'll say, we're providing this subsidy, but look, we're projected to get all of it back within the next 20 years. And from an investment standpoint, there has to be, first of all, a recognition the public is taking on a tremendous amount of risk in doing this. And if the public, like collectively through the local government, is going to take on this much risk, what is the return on that investment? If all the tax dollars, all the revenue that you're collecting, all the going to go towards breaking even, hopefully in 2 decades, why are you doing this? Like, what's the reward? And I know people come back and say, well, it's the jobs, it's the growth, but like the Taco John's that I showed you, the analysis I showed you was what the numbers are. What I didn't show you is that beyond the numbers, there's actually 27 years of tax subsidy that makes that disparity even worse. 27 years where the city's taxes, the taxes that Taco John's paid, are given back to Taco John's in order to pay for the costs of demoing that old block and upgrading the infrastructure. And the question that I had is like, what do we get for that? And the answer was, we get Taco John's for 27 years. And I think that in no other, let me say it like this, and I'm not trying to be pejorative, but no non-government, no one in the private sector would do something that stupid. Their return, right? They just would be like, I'm not putting that much money at risk over that long a period of time without something more secure in terms of my return. And I think that's where we've kind of expect city. I've written articles that are titled this dumb money. We've expected cities to be the dumb money at the card table. And the reality is a Venn diagram of good projects is a project that makes financial sense for the city, a project that makes financial sense for the developer. Where those two overlap, that's a good project. Where they don't overlap, that's a bad project. And so often we're willing to say, well, what makes sense for the developer? Well, that must be what we have to do. And the reality is we just have to work a little harder to figure that out. So, all right.
Thanks. There are
more?
two more in the chat box.
Okay. Keep it going. Do you want me to read this one? I see one on the bottom here. What are the biggest obstacles for municipalities in incorporating redesign of their city streets to match more of the strong towns philosophy? Edward, you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different obstacles to it. And it goes everything from the reading of manuals to the operations. I'm sure in Utah, where I'm at in West Virginia, there's a lot of power they give to the plow operator. So, we're looking at this right now. Strong Towns is rethinking how we analyze these streets through our crash analysis studio. But one of the things through all of this, and I'm somebody that's coming right out of a local government. I've been there for the last almost 14 years, 15 years. I've yet to find a mayor in a small town or any town that didn't believe that they could have the best and safest town in America. And I think it's, instead of trying to find what the obstacles are, I think it's the direction. And every mayor I've ever worked with that wanted something done was able to direct staff and the folks at the table to get those things done. Now, it wasn't easy, but they have an enormous amount of authority, just as they do in running all government at the city level. And I think it's an important role that a mayor has of setting the stage of what they want the streets to be, because in the thousands of pages of manuals that are available, there is a solution that gets you walkable and safe streets. And I think we forget that. So looking at that, I think we can outline all those obstacles, but I think it starts with strong leadership with the mayor and the council of towns. And from there, you can easily direct staff to do these things. And if that's your obstacle at a staff level, then you have tools to deal with that to get the roads you want.
I do think that just philosophically, there is a underlying DNA of street design that in the US that descends from highway design, right? I mean, we created this body of knowledge around building highways, and then street design became a derivation of that. And what is being done in some circles right now, and we're part of this, but there are other groups that are working on this too, is to create a different body of knowledge around street design that is separate from highway design, so that we're actually working on, something at, we're not constrained intellectually or philosophically or in our approach by the idea that average daily traffic flow is primary concern, and that safety comes through having big buffers and making sure that vehicles have far sight distances and can flow very quickly. Those are all things that work on highways that do not work on local streets. And I think, shifting that mindset is a really important effort. All right.
Yeah. And the bottom up approach too. I mean, as citizens, you know best what is happening on your streets. I know, working on a main street, the business owners know what works best. They know that the highway model doesn't work for them. By listening to those individuals, or by those individuals participating in the process, there's a lot you can do. So it's those observations that you can't be frozen. Don't get yourself stuck in a position that you feel that you have to do the highway solution, because there are other solutions that, frankly, most folks at a level, they know if the car goes slower, it's safer, they're more comfortable on the street. And that has a lot of value in the process.
Right. I see this question on here about, are we on the verge of imploding? And what are some examples of play? There's the Hemingway quote where he asked someone who went bankrupt how they went bankrupt, and they said slowly and then suddenly. And I think what we see is a lot of places in the slowly stage, right? I'll go back to Jackson, Mississippi. If you go back a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades in Jackson, Mississippi, they were having isolated, localized water main breaks that became systematic. I mean, it became like a chronic condition. I saw interviews from a decade ago with restaurant owners who would say, we've learned to adapt because you never know when you're going to have 48 hours or 72 hours without water. And so we have a supply of water here, and we've got ways of circumventing this. And when the water goes out, here's how we stay in business. And so what happens is that kind of like, I'm wearing my glasses, kind of like losing your vision a little bit. It doesn't go all at once. It goes a little bit and then a little bit and then a little bit. And pretty soon you're squinting at the screen. And then you realize that, like, I got to get glasses. I got to get my sight adjusted. This is the same thing we see happening. So what you see is you see cities that in their taxes are taking on more debt, are cutting back on services, and are increasing their backlog of promises. Here's all the streets that need to be fixed this year. We only have the money to do this many. So the rest of these become next year's promise. And then we get to next year and the backlog is even bigger and we have the same thing. And so you wind up with these studies that say we have, to quadruple our road budget to catch up in the next 10 years. These are the symptoms that we see over and over again. Sometimes, occasionally we see cities get to the Jackson. I mean, Detroit is the prime example. And I know the story of Detroit is a lot about, people left and they have poorer people there and Detroit was the very first city to really go all in on this suburban experiment. I mean, they were the ones that pioneered it during the Great Depression. And at the end of World War II, we all copied them. I mean, they've been doing it for a generation. Detroit is in many ways just a generation ahead of everybody else. So, yeah, I think that, what we see is this kind of broad pressure. And what I would like to do is for people to recognize it, not as a short-term impact of the Great Recession or the pandemic or whatever, like the latest thing we point to is, but a long-term chronic condition that we actually can do something about, but we have to recognize it first.
Excellent. And we're getting some more
happier question, perhaps. Yeah, go ahead.
So I popped them in there, but let's take them by the first one there. When you look at value per acre, you're not considering sales tax generation. For example, the Taco John's may generate a lot more sales than the small barbershops. How does sales tax interact with strong towns and your approach?
I'll take this one, Ed, if you don't mind, just because I've gotten this a lot. The interesting thing is that when we look at the one in Minnesota here, cities don't get sales tax in Minnesota. So it's not a revenue generation thing for cities here. So we didn't look at it. That being said, there have been other places where we have looked at it. Urban 3 has done extensive sales tax modeling. And the reality is that everything we see from a property value standpoint is also reflected in sales tax. And quite frankly, that's what you would expect. Places that generate a lot of sales are more valuable. And places that generate a lot of sales pay more sales taxes. And so there's a value per acre kind of correlation to sales tax that is really, really strong. Urban 3 has done all of that modeling, and it's kind of shocking how consistent it is across different municipal revenue streams. The traditional development pattern pays more per acre in kind of every dimension than we see post-war development. And the further you go out in time, the more that disparity grows.
Great. Edward, do you want to, the next one I have there is many small towns in southern Utah are seeing high growth because of visitors coming to the national parks and other recreational areas. A new economy is developing over the agricultural economy of the past. This is creating quite a tension between the folks that have been here for decades and the new folks. Are there examples of others that have had to deal with this type of growth?
Yeah, I'm dealing it with, so I live in West Virginia, and I'm just outside the DC area. So it's the heart of Civil War. It's where early American revolutionaries that they're proud in my town because we sent the first volunteers after the shots in Concord. So we're a community that is something of a bedroom community coming out from that. So there are communities across the country that are taking advantage of the tourism economy. And I think it's a good economy to take advantage of. The thing is that visitors are coming to your community because of the value that you have in your place. And it's important that as you're developing in those areas and as you're planning, not to lose sight of that, because it's very easy to go, if everybody's coming from California and they're all from LA, they don't want to come to your town and have another LA. They're coming to your community to follow.
They're not looking for In-N-Out Burger. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in those areas, I worked in Florida too, where you had the county I worked in, 50% of the county went home when summer hit. They all came down in the winter. So you need to recognize those types of economies out there, and it's a little bit different than other places, but this is not new. I would look at a lot of Florida towns. I would look at anywhere that is dealing with a lot of the cultural heritage sites across the country. And I think it's an opportunity to go and tailor your economy, but do not lose sight of who you are and where you are now. They're coming because of what you've established as your identity today.
And I want to give one insight too. And I was able to, in September of last year, I was invited to speak in Hawaii at a conference, and I'd never been to Hawaii. And when I'm on the ground in a place, I talk to people and I ask them things. So I asked all the waiters and waitresses I met, how are things going? What do you see around here? What's going on? Where are you from? How is the pandemic? And did the same thing with shop owners and the same thing with the technical people I ran into. It was fascinating to me. It wasn't universal, but it was pretty close to universal. How many people told me that the pandemic was the best life they had ever had on the Hawaiian island of Kauai? And when I asked them to elaborate on it, they said, we had everything we need. The tourists weren't here. Everything was wonderful. And, I asked them, so what did you do for work? And I came here to this restaurant. There were a few fewer people, but more locals went out then. And it was really interesting because you think of Hawaii's entire economy as being tourism. It's actually about 20% of their economy is tourism. The rest of it is just the people who are there, right? There's a lot of just internal flow like there is with any economy. It kind of bolstered this notion that I've been taught, that I've heard said a long time, and that I believe from living in one of Minnesota's recreation areas. If you want to build a great place for visitors, build a great place for the people who are there. And if it's a great place for the people who are there and they love it, people are going to flock there and they're going to want to be there. If you build the next version of the pop-up city, complete with the In-N-Out Burger and the McDonald's and we built the Kohl's at the prime intersection of our two highways coming into town. And we tore down this iconic amusement park to do it. And now our Kohl's is shutting down. You look at that investment, and that was a very short-term transaction. Not a long-term investment in either tourism, our culture, our people, or our place. And I do think that there's a balance there where the things that are best for tourism are also the best for our people and our place.
Excellent. I think we've got 3 more lined up in the chat box, and that might take us right to 12:30. So I'll start with this first one. As I understand, Strong Towns is embarking on a project to design a community engagement process to increase residents' awareness and activism to address street design and how it will impact neighborhoods. Will you talk a bit about that project and how you're progressing with it?
I'll answer the first part, and then Edward, you can take the second part. So this is the Crash Analysis Studio. What we have recognized, we have a Safe and Productive Streets campaign. And what we've recognized is that we have this urgent need to shift the priority of our streets from being through traffic to being designed for safety and productivity. And that this solves a lot of the issues that we deal with at Strong Towns if we can systematically do this. The greatest obstacle for doing this is that street design tends to emanate from highway design, tends to be very top down. On local streets in particular, mayors, city councils, local engineers have a lot more flexibility than they think that they do. One of the things we recognized was that when crashes occur in our cities, we tend to follow the standard highway process, which is to go out with a checklist, send out the police, send out the insurance companies, and try to figure out who is at blame. Who do we blame and what percentage do we blame them? Were they drinking? Check. Were they texting? Check. Were they speeding? Check. And we just have a checklist. And the problem with that is that we don't actually learn from those crashes. We don't actually embody any knowledge from that. If you look at airline crashes, every time there's a crash, even a tiny crash, we go out and learn from it. If you look at hospitals and the way hospitals are run, if there's an adverse outcome, if someone comes in and they're healthy and then they die in the hospital, they will actually do what's called a morbidity and mortality conference and try to figure out what are all the factors that led to this adverse outcome. Not the cause, but the numerous factors. And so what we have done is we have created a studio to look at crashes and to analyze the multiple factors that go into creating a crash. And we are trying to, we are going to launch this and we're modeling it so that cities across North America, particularly on their local streets where they don't have to follow an AASHTO book, they don't have to follow state standards, they don't have to follow federal guidelines, they have 100% flexibility of movement, can adopt this process, learn from their own crashes and do something different. So maybe Edward, you can kind of give an update on where we're at with this process because we're getting very close.
Yeah. So right now, we've got two different things happening. First, we have the ability for people to nominate crashes. So if you've had a crash within your community and you want us to look at it, there's an opportunity to do that. You can go to the Strong Towns website and you can type in our Crash Analysis Studio. We've got a really simple online form to fill that out. And this puts it in the queue for us to review as one of 18 candidates for this year that we're going to be looking at. The second track that we're on is we've already received 56 nominations across the country, and we're looking at those. We've got 4 in the pipeline right now that we're setting up for our first Crash Analysis Studio, which should occur by the end of the month. And this is going to be a webinar type format. Again, we'll notice that out. If you're on our mailing list, you'll see that. You follow the website. And we're going to be bringing in experts from 2 different angles. First, we're going to bring in professional experts that are in the planning, the engineering, the roadway professions, your typical professional group. We also are working with our nominees on the ground to find local professionals, the business owners, the property owners, the vested citizens that understand these streets and these conditions on the ground because they live it every day. So we're getting prepared to announce our first Crash Analysis Studio. It'll be a webinar type format. Everybody's welcome to participate and watch as we discuss and dissect these crashes. And through 18 of these, one, we're going to teach folks how to do this themselves on the ground in their own communities. And 2, we're going to start to develop observations that we can see in a slightly different format than what you normally see us write about in Strong Towns. So again, you can take this at your local level and implement it. And the strategy of this is not looking at the state standards. It's not looking at the federal standards. I think we've all gotten tired of yelling out into the wind at those. We're working at the most rudimentary level. We're specifically looking at streets where cities have maintenance and control over. And by utilizing this at the local level, we can take these practices that through recommendations, cities can go out there tomorrow and make changes. And we'll document those changes and let that bubble up to the state level. So we're not challenging through a State Department of Highways. We're working with willing partners to find real successes. So keep an ear out. We're scheduled for the end of end of January for our first studio. And we have 18 of these that we've committed to that'll take us into early next year.
Excellent. And thank you for that. And then did that cover the AASHTO question? Do you both, everyone see that in there? Encouraging, how can, let's see, the new SS4A federal program is going to have a substantial impact on changing the safety of streets as you have advocated for in your books. How do you encourage AASHTO to make more substantial changes in their design standards, et cetera, to get away from creating more and more roads? I think stroads, he says. I don't know if that's a strode or a street or a road.
Stroads. No, stroads. So we're happy to engage with AASHTO, and we've had discussions with federal DOT, and I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work there. Where we find that our strength is, and where we find that there's more momentum, and really, quite frankly, a void of intellectual thought. In other words, we have mayors and city councils who want to change their street design. We have local engineers who want to do things differently. We have all these players, and there's a vacuum of stuff out there to help them do this. They default to, what does AASHTO do? What does the federal government do? We're trying to get them reoriented so they can see how much power and authority they have, how quickly they can act, how they can act and not increase their liability, but actually decrease their liability by acting. We want to change their conversation because we think that optimistically, the federal government and changing AASHTO, changing this manual and that manual will have an impact. I think that impact will be measured in decades. We want to have an impact tomorrow. There's thousands of people dying every year, and we want to impact this now. And we think this is the quickest and most effective way to do that is from the bottom up.
Excellent. Last, I think, question. Well, maybe here. Let's see. I'm trying to scroll down to it. Let's see. Seems to me that financing and accounting of cities is not intuitive. People and businesses do not know better because they are often sold on the idea that they can get Cadillac infrastructure and services without paying for it. Cutting back on infrastructure and services or being able to morph into Cadillac style services. This is a relevant topic because people are concerned about the cost of living, the rise of housing, insecurity, etc. That was the state. I don't know if that's a statement or question. But.
Yes. Well, let me point out one thing. I do think, how do I say this nicely? I want to affirm kind of the comment. I think a lot of business people are not good at the government accounting part because it is very, very different. In the private sector, we want ideally actors in the private sector to take risk. That's why we have bankruptcy protection for them, because we want them to try things and figure things out and be competitive with each other in a competitive landscape. We want their balance sheets to reflect their real liabilities. We want them to, there's a whole bunch of things that we do in the private sector because a competitive marketplace is really, really great. Cities are a collection of us. It's all of us working together to do communal things. And you can be very pro-market like I am, but understand that the roles of cities are not to be ultra competitive. If the city of Brainerd fails and the neighboring city of Crosby is successful, we can't dig up the sewer in this city and sell it to, for pennies on the dollar to Crosby. We don't tear down our water tower and offer it to them. We don't move our houses over there. That's what you would do in the private sector. If one business fails and one business is successful, they take the other's customers, they take the other's products. There's a bankruptcy process where you liquidate assets. Cities don't have that. When we build a road, we now as a community have that road as a liability for life. We have just made an eternal commitment to this thing. And that is different than running a business. The other thing that is very different is that city accounting is different. If you are a business and you say, I will pay a pension fund out in 20 years, that's actually reflected on your balance sheet. If you are a city and you say, I will maintain a roadway 20 years from now, that's reflected nowhere on your balance sheet. Like that's not accounted for anywhere. We don't do city accounting a way that actually reflects things in a business sense. And this leads us often to when we go in as business-minded people to, first of all, not understand what's going on, and second, make incorrect assumptions about what good investments are for cities. One of our 5 strategic campaigns is about transparent local accounting. And that includes not only the work that Urban 3 is doing and some of this financial stuff, but it's also changing local accounting practices so that public officials and people in the community leaders actually have a clear understanding of what's going on from a financial standpoint. Again, none of this is pointing fingers. I think we have built a system to do one thing, which is grow our economy in a macro sense very quickly. And I think we need a shift to do something else, which is mature our places so that they are prosperous and so that they endure. And that is just a different mindset, a different approach. It is one that is going to require us all to kind of think about things a little bit differently, including public accounting. So this has been fun. I'm excited to head out to Utah. I know I've got a couple weeks I'm going to be. Yeah, you've got places to sign up. I've been, we've had many of these conversations, and every time I'm out there, it is very engaging. People have a lot of questions, and I've said I feel like Utah is a state where the alignment with Strong Towns principles and community really is strong. And so I'm looking forward to getting out and chatting with people and kind of walking some streets and looking at some maps and getting, a sense on the ground of where things are at and talking to people in real time. I think this is going to be great.
Yes, thank you very much, Chuck and Edward, and everybody online for all the patience today as we made this work. It will be recorded, and I dropped a link to register for the upcoming workshops in the chat, as well as it's available on the ULCT website under the events tab. So thank you for everybody's time, and we're going to get more in depth with these discussions. We greatly appreciate it. With that, I will sign us off, and you online folks can go grab some lunch. Appreciate it.